And Mr. Boyette is also gone with an excuse. And the mayor is actually at a special meeting with the governor as we speak and with the city administrator addressing our final contract with the funding from the state. So he has our approval to be gone as well. I'm honored to be here to lead our meeting. Thank you all in the audience. 100 of you, wow. We have got a lot of people to, well, relatively speaking. And all those who are listening, welcome and thank you for being here. I'd like to turn over first, Mr. Iflin, anything before we start? I know you'll have an administrator's report as well.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor Yakowicz, no, nothing to start off, and I think we've got John Felton ready to go online whenever you're ready.
Sure, I'm ready. Would you like to introduce him?
Sure. So, Mr. Felton, if you are on there and can't hear us, we were having some technical difficulties there. I think we are ready for your report tonight.
All right, thank you, everyone. So I'm back for my monthly update. I'm going to give you some updates on some of the data you've seen before, as well as some additional things. So let me just share my screen here. So, Kevin, can you see that?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. So we'll start like we usually do with what's going on nationally. You can see that the country is starting to slow down a bit, particularly in the southeast where the current surge began. If you look on the right side there, you can see that Montana has the second highest rate per 100,000. This top group has been pretty consistent for the better part of a month now. So not only is Montana second, but the two states that depend on us for regional medical care are third and fourth, and then Idaho is 8th and South Dakota is 16th. I wanted to just put some context in that almost 46 million cases in the United States. That is roughly the population of Argentina. And the 745,000 deaths due to COVID-related deaths in the United States is roughly the population of the country of Guyana. So again, these numbers are really big. I sometimes feel like we get a little numb to them because this has been going on a while, but they really are striking numbers in terms of the significance and severity of the pandemic. I'm looking at Montana now. You can see in the last month, since we spoke before, Montana's rate has started to come down a little bit. You can follow this period from late July through late September, which is really the growth period. That was our exponential growth. And then it sort of flattened out for a period of about a month or so. In the last 3 or 4 weeks, we started to work our way down. Yellowstone County looks similar, but not quite the same. So we've been on the same growth rate, except our growth actually lasted a little longer. And then you can see this is kind of where we flattened out over the last 3 weeks or so. It's moving around somewhat, but what we're not seeing is that high rate of growth that you see through the earlier part of the late summer and early fall. When we look at Montana in blue versus Yellowstone County in orange, you can see that even as the state has come down, we have not come down. So that makes this gray line, which is the proportionate share of cases in the state that are Yellowstone County cases, is now pretty significantly above our proportionate share of the population. So we've had the most number of cases for the past several weeks, pretty much on a daily basis. When we look at cases per 100,000 on a weekly basis, this is where you can really see that period of exponential growth, late July through really early October. So several month period of exponential growth. And then we started to kind of work our way around. So we came down a little bit, went up a little bit, but really this area here for the last 4 weeks or so is kind of where we've stabilized and stopped the exponential growth rate. If we look at cases just on a monthly basis, again, I've showed you this before, that April through July, we had 1,823 cases. We exceeded that in August, and then September doubled August. So that is that exponential growth period. It really starts from late July, goes all the way through August, all the way through September. October, the rate of growth slowed, but you can see that October we had more cases in October 2021 than we had in our previous high, which was November 2020, by about 500 cases. So we really did see a pretty significant increase compared to anything we've seen before. 90 per 100,000 for the month and about 146 cases per day. That's figuring on a 7-day week in October. Test positivity, we don't have data for the week ending October 30th yet. Those come out on Tuesdays, and I always talk to you on Monday. But you can see we've been sitting right around that 17% now for about 4 weeks. Again, that number includes all testing in Yellowstone County. So it's what happens at pharmacies, our testing sites, the hospital medical practice testing sites, nursing homes, both for symptomatic and asymptomatic folks. So about 1 out of every 6 tests that's done in the county is positive. When we look just at symptomatic testing, we're still up around 30% of symptomatic folks are testing positive for COVID. So important thing to remember about that is that means that about 7 out of 10 people roughly who have the symptoms of respiratory disease don't have COVID. So there's a lot of other stuff going around. RSV, parainfluenza, adenovirus, rhinovirus, those are all making the rounds. We've had quite an RSV year. It's actually been pretty significant for young children and had resulted in hospitalization of several of those kids. This is our hospitalization numbers. This is on a daily basis, the census of COVID-19 patients in our 2 hospitals. So you can see here's our period of growth. We're just not getting out of that. It's coming down a little bit, but we're still staying pretty high, right around 135 to 140 patients in our 2 hospitals every day. This is accurate through today. So you can see that our highest average daily census for COVID was November 20 at about 138. We ended up about 135 for October. We did see an increase in the proportion of patient days that are in the ICU to about just a shade under 30%. That was about 25% during our last surge. So a lot of really, really sick people. We are seeing over the last 2 months, particularly a predominance of Yellowstone County residents, 60 to 70%. The other 30 to 40% are those regional patients who we've also had patients from all over the country, some of whom were just traveling and happened to be in this area when they got sick, some of whom were actually hospital shopping and ended up in our hospitals because they couldn't find other places. The important thing to remember about this is it doesn't matter from a hospital perspective whether the patient is a resident of Yellowstone County or not. The burden on the hospital services and the intensive care units is impacted by the number of patients, not where they're from. When we look at kids, we are seeing some modulation in the kid numbers. These are the proportion of cases every week who are 19 years of age or younger. We peaked out around 25% back sort of when school started. We kind of worked our way down a little bit. And had a little bit of a bump the previous week, but this week we're down under 15%. So that number is kind of modulating. If you remember back when we were in school last year, we talked a lot about we were typically 12 to 15%, so we were kind of working our way back there this year now. Not much change here. Again, I always want to point out this largest group of patients, about almost 2/3 of the patients are between 20 and 59, which is that working age population, and we'll revisit that population when we talk about vaccinations. And this is the variant report. So this is by the state, it's not by county. But you can see for the last several months, it's all Delta all the time. So that is clearly the predominant strain, which accounts for the high transmissibility, the high number of cases, despite having a portion of the population vaccinated. We, of course, don't have very many other mitigation measures in place. There's no mask requirement. There's no limitations on occupancy or hours of operation, gathering size, those sorts of things. So there's sort of a trade-off there between some vaccination and the absence of those mitigation measures. If we look at the population, the proportion of our population that is fully vaccinated versus those that have natural infection, I encourage you to follow the top of this green line and kind of look at that slope. and then look at the top of the blue line. And so what we're seeing is the growth is faster in new cases than it is in people becoming fully vaccinated. So we know that we're still seeing a lot of cases. All of these folks have some degree of immunity. And then we know that, again, there's some overlap in those. If we look just at vaccine administration, which is all sites in Yellowstone County, we've administered a little over 165,000 doses. So again, that's Riverstone Health, our hospitals, medical practices, pharmacies, everyone that's doing it. We have just under 75,000 fully vaccinated people as of the end of last week. On a week-by-week basis, you can see here, we've seen some growth. The blue bars are the number of doses administered each week. We've seen some growth in that. A significant part of that growth is for people getting their third dose or booster doses. If we look at the proportion, so we're up over 4,000 doses last week, which we haven't seen in a while. But if we look here at the orange line, which is the number of people who are newly deemed fully vaccinated, that's increasing at a rate of about 600 or 700 a week rather than the number of vaccine doses. This is last week, the week ending October 22nd. The state will reissue new information probably in the next day or so. We do know that as of right now, Yellowstone County is at 55% and the state's at 55 or 56%. So we continue to be kind of on par with the state. I would warn you that you'll see those numbers drop substantially fairly soon, I anticipate, because right now eligible Montanans are only age 12 and older. We anticipate, and we'll talk about this in a few seconds, that 5 to 11-year-old will get authorized for vaccines soon, and that will add that population of people to our denominator. So because it takes a period of time to get fully vaccinated, you'll see that those numbers drop pretty significantly in the next week or two. We did have about more than 80% of our 70 and older folks, really our 60 and older folks, who've had at least one dose of vaccine, so they've been better protected. We have seen a lot of deaths that are in younger people, 40s, 50s, 60s, some as early as the 20s. When we look at our age cohorts, if kind of the middle of the chart here, these 4 line sections in the middle is that adult working population. So you can see that population as a whole is about 50% vaccinated. That's where 2/3 of our cases are, and about half of those folks are vaccinated. So that continues to be a little bit of a mismatch. We have seen some growth in the younger cohorts. This again is as of 10/23 because we don't have the new data yet. It'll come in tomorrow. But those younger groups, those first 5 cohorts increased by 1% each one. The older ones they're pretty highly vaccinated, so it's a little harder to get those to move. I want to talk a little bit about where we are with boosters. So this is off the CDC website. Anyone who got Pfizer or Moderna are eligible for a booster if they meet one of these requirements, 65 years of older, and then if they work or live in high-risk settings. So people who live in long-term care settings, high risk, they're eligible at age 65 and up. Adults who have underlying medical conditions, and there's a list of those, it's a lot of chronic conditions, and people who live or work in high-risk settings. So that's first responders, healthcare workers, including long-term care, people who are in congregate care like group homes or correction settings. All those folks are eligible for boosters if they've been at least 6 months since their second dose. For Johnson & Johnson, it's anyone who's 18 years or older, regardless of where they work or live, and it's 2 months after the second shot, or the first shot, sorry. The boosters is where you can talk about mix and match, and this is some language that's been used by CDC and others. So if you've gotten 2 doses of Pfizer or Moderna and you meet one of these requirements, or 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson and you meet that 2-month requirement, your booster dose can be any one of the 3 vaccines. That's the mix and match idea. We differentiate boosters, which is what I just talked about, and third doses. Third doses are obviously only for people who had Pfizer or Moderna. and that's for folks who have moderately to severely compromised immune systems. So really, this is not about boosting. This is about getting a more robust effect from the initial series. So this is only 28 days after the second dose. This is for folks who have situations like they have had organ transplants, bone marrow transplants, cancer where they're under chemotherapy, some autoimmune disorders that have used medications that you see advertised on TV like Humira or Enbrel or Remicade, those sorts of drugs. This is not the booster. This is really to build the initial response to the vaccine series. The last thing I want to talk about for vaccines is where we are with the 5 to 11-year-old. So there's a multi-step process here. FDA goes first, and they've authorized the use of only the Pfizer product for children aged 5 to 11. That doesn't mean we can administer those doses yet. After CDC comes up with their recommendation and approval, then we can start administering those doses. The ACIP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, meets tomorrow, and we expect that there will be some approval coming out of that to start using a lesser dose of the Pfizer product on those 5 to 11-year-olds. I want to switch now and talk about the COVID-associated deaths. The reason I think this is important, as I said earlier, I think we're getting a little numb to these numbers because we've been, for 20 months now, we've been talking about people dying of COVID. But the numbers really are striking when we put them in context. So here's one way. This came out from the State Health Department. It was just issued. It appears as though this is based on review of death certificate information, that COVID-19 will be the third leading cause of death in Montana in 2021, behind cancer and cardiovascular disease. So certainly no other infectious processes are up in that level. This is what our deaths have looked like in Yellowstone County. Over about the 20-month period since this all started, I know it seems like a long time, it's only 20 months. Through yesterday, we had 411 deaths of Yellowstone County residents that have been deemed COVID-related. Now, again, that means that the physician put on the death certificate that COVID-19 was either the cause of death or a contributing factor. So that's not something that hospitals are coming up with or public health comes up with. That is the attending physician who is determining contributing factors or cause of death. That's about, when you average that out over the 20-month period, that's about 21 a month, or 252 COVID-related deaths in a 12-month period. If we compare that to roadway fatalities, so this is published by the Montana Department of Transportation. Over that 10-year period from 2010 through 2019, 188 Yellowstone County residents died in roadway fatalities over that 10 years. So that's about 1.2 a month. If you remember, I said that we're averaging 21 a month in COVID deaths. So if we had the same number of deaths from auto accidents if we have for COVID, over that 10-year period, we would have 2,520 deaths as opposed to the 188. And again, I think this is important to remember because this is where we get a little numb and kind of forgetting. We think about when people die in auto accidents, the tragedy that comes with that, and we see things like white crosses on the side of the road and memorials and shrines that people put up. We need to remember, if that was the equivalent, it'd be 2,500 of those deaths instead of 188. So I just point that out because it really is an astounding number of deaths and an astounding impact on our community. So with that, I'll stop here and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Felton. Any questions from council? Mr. Brown.
Uh-oh. I'm lazy. Yeah, John, one of my questions
is, do we have numbers on folks that are getting COVID that are vaccinated? Is that?
I mean, that's certainly on the rise, I know that, and the effects seem to be a bit less, but do we have those numbers?
Yeah, so we don't have the numbers of breakthrough cases total. What we do is we track that on hospitalized patients. And it's not insignificant, but clearly most of our patients are unvaccinated in the hospital. So we typically run right around an 80-20 mix in the hospital. So about 80% of our hospitalized patients are unvaccinated and about 20% are vaccinated. The people that we're seeing who are vaccinated, who are either getting hospitalized or succumbing to COVID-19, tend to have pretty significant underlying health issues or underlying immune system issues. So as I say, right now about 4 out of 5 hospitalized patients are breakthrough cases, about 1 out of 5 are, 4 out of 5 are unvaccinated, about 1 out of 5 are breakthrough cases.
Okay, thank you. A follow-up? We're good?
Follow-up?
Yep.
So do we just have the hospitalization numbers? Is that all we have? So we don't have any idea of those that go get tested or are infected but stay home that are vaccinated?
Yeah, we don't have that information. We do have it on a national level, and I don't recall the numbers off the top of my head, but it's sort of in that same 75 to 80% of cases are unvaccinated people. We don't collect that at the time of the people are being tested.
Okay, thank you.
And then one more.
Well, okay.
Just curious, John, are they still recommending that you go in and get a test? I've talked to several people that have called the hotlines or whatever, and they're saying unless you really have respiratory issues, there's really no reason to go get tested. Is that kind of the norm now?
No, we're still encouraging people to get tested because even with mild disease, people can be infectious. So we still encourage people to get tested. We have, in the last several weeks, Billings Clinic has a testing site that they're running, and Riverstone Health and St. Vincent have opened up a joint testing site in the St. Vincent parking lot to get more capacity for tests.
Okay, thanks, John.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Neese?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. John, I had same question that Councilman Brown had, and because I get this question a lot is, what is the breakthrough percentages? And so if that's something you can get to us, I think that would be helpful. I hear numbers, to 50% to, 2%. So it is something that I think that the community would be helpful to the community to kind of settle what that number is. You mentioned during your presentation that the height of the percent of patients is that younger group, that middle category, 35 to 54, something like that. Did you mean patients in the hospital, or are you saying of the people getting COVID?
Those are people who have tested positive for COVID. Okay.
Do we know what the age range is ending up in the hospital? Is it the older, younger? Is it follow the same mix?
It tends to be an older group, mostly 60s, 70s are what we're seeing a lot of, but we are seeing 30, 40, and 50-year-olds in the hospital, but the bulk of people who are in the hospital are in older age groups.
Okay, and Deputy Mayor, one more question. Something else I hear often is, the very young are not getting it, or if they get it, it's very mild. They're not sick, and then I heard somewhere on the radio someone say not a single, person or a single young person has died from this. Do you have stats on that on your website so we can correct some of this information if that needs to be corrected?
Yeah, so the youngest deaths in Yellowstone County were several people in their 20s. Again, I think this is a little bit symptomatic in my mind of the numbness that we have. When people get shot or people have car accidents, you don't hear others say, well, at least it wasn't a child, right? I mean, the death is the death, and yes, fortunately it is true that it's infrequent that children get severely ill or die. But I think we just need to be careful to not make that mean that this isn't a big deal. This is a big deal. This is something that we've never seen.
All right, thank you. Any other question among council? All right, I'd like to open up to public. Anybody in the public would like to share? Anyone in the public? All right, anyone in the public? All right. Public comment has been closed. Council, we good? Mr. Felton, thank you for your service, and we hope next time we hear from you to hear better news.
I do too. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Iflin, you have the floor for administrator's report.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Yakowicz. I just got a couple things tonight. Since City Administrator Kukulski was not here, he was going to cover some things with the water treatment plant out there, but we'll postpone that to a later date. 2 reminders, just a legislative breakfast is November 10th at 7 a.m. And if you are going to attend that legislative breakfast, please RSVP to Winnette by tomorrow, if you could, please. And then also on the City Administrator's evaluation forms, if you have not got those turned into Annette, if you could please do that so that she can start compiling and putting those together. So that's all the reports I have tonight, Deputy Mayor.
Great, thank you. And we'll have a little discussion council discussion about evaluations if you wish more on that. No public comment on that. Council, any questions for Mr. Iflin? Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. Not necessarily a question, but is it possible that we can remind everyone to vote? They've got their ballots and...
Don't you do that?
Yep, so we would like to remind everyone to vote. You've got your ballots. They were mailed to you. And at this point, you actually need to hand deliver your vote to the Yellowstone County Elections Office, which is in the Yellowstone County Courthouse right across from City Hall. So please vote.
Great. And you reminded me, Councilmember Ronning, also that the mayor of Laurel passed. I don't know if any of you knew him personally, but our condolences to the family and to Laurel and to the community there. Sorry to hear about Mr. Nelson's passing. All right, we'll move on then. Mr. Watterson, you have the floor. And this will be on Technology Replacement Program, TRP.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's my pleasure to present to you the annual Technology Replacement Plan. I feel a little awkward here tonight. I'm normally following the SIP and ERP, but here I get to present all on my own this evening, which is a great opportunity, so thank you for that. Each year, we have a committee of, let's see, where am I?
Make sure it's on, it's on the back, on the side.
Aha. Where am I pointing to? Is it to the?
There's a little lever on the side you got to turn on. Yeah. I'll try to look.
There we go. So each year we have a committee of members from throughout the organization, and they represent and do inventory and verifications of technology throughout the organization. And you can see the many different committee members from, again, all around the city of Billings. And I think I'm the lone ranger here, so, yep. But they've all worked hard on this, so that when you see them, thank them. So the plan has been in existence for many years. It's followed pretty much the same format, where it's a mechanism to replace technology. But unlike the ERP, which you'll hear about in 2 weeks, it does not have a funding mechanism. It's meant to get departments to see that their technology is aging and to plan for and budget for replacement of technology so that it doesn't end up failing or causing downtime and all of the situations associated with that, not keeping things at least fresh and on current maintenance. We look at things that have a useful life of 3 years or more. We're looking at multiple year scheduled replacement. We look at PC standards. For a long time, the price kept coming down as the performance went up. Right now, our costs are going up again on PCs. They're harder to get. And because of processors and other components, they're just becoming more expensive again. Not outlandish, but the trend is not continuing to go down. The committee reviews what each department has in there, reviews to make sure people want to replace things or maybe extend it into the next year because, hey, everything's working well. There's a number of different situations where people will push it into the next year. And then we do an annual review. Just some highlights of the current plan. We have about 57 general office computers, which is actually down a little bit from previous years. Some tablets, high-end systems, some copiers, laptops, mobile computers, servers, pretty standard stuff. Some of the bigger items that are non-standard, the library self-checkout systems, I believe there are 4 of them. There's also a couple of gate detection systems, which the library is doing, or round out some of their larger things. We're looking at some core network switches and IT. We're looking at end of life on our current ones within the next fiscal year, so we're getting set to replace those. The water department is looking at replacing out, I believe, 15 of the water reading radios. These have been a great success story. I have a history back in the day of being in the water plant down at Belknap when they had numerous readers that read the business every year and then read residential every other month. Now they have this entire fleet or number of radio systems that are constantly getting the reads from residential and business. I know there's still some manual reading going on, but what a great advancement in technology that has been. So these are positioned strategically throughout our community on city towers or other city assets to collect, and but they've been working for about 8-9 years, so they're in need of replacement. And city Wi-Fi, so the Wi-Fi that you work on when you're in our city facilities, we have the same system in every building throughout our organization. We started 5-6 years ago, probably 6 to 7 years ago. We had about 60-70 Wi-Fi access points. With adding new facilities and more extended needs, we have about 131 right now, and just today I ordered 2 more. I mean, so it just continues to grow. But our system is going end of life, and we're looking at, it says part 1 on your thing, another place it'll say 50%. We're estimating about $70,000 to replace half of them and go to a new system, starting with the Stillwater building, and then we'll do entire facilities at a time, so they're all on the same wireless. And then in the FY24, we'll follow up with, we'll know then, have a better projection to know whether the money we're budgeting gets us 60% or 65, or whether it's 45, and we'll be able to budget the remaining money to finish the change out. So I'm understanding a few weeks ago you got a presentation on the needs for a new radio communication system. This came to me a little bit, just literally today, that there was some discussion as to whether this should be in the TRP or not in the TRP. So your council memo did not include the $10 million estimate for a communication system. And some of the charts and graphs I'm going to show you in tonight's presentation do not reflect that. As you will see, if I take a $1 million presentation that is divided up amongst the organization and throw in a $10 million elephant, all of my charts and graphs will be irrelevant. So you'll see that in here. The communication system, again, as was presented to you, is to facilitate for emergency response. It's about 20 years old. It's hitting end of life, not this coming spring, but the following spring. And estimated cost is 10 to 15 million for, based on our available funding, as you can see the sources, and for the rest of the presentation, we're looking at a $10 million figure, and you'll see that represented in the slides. One of the things we do with our technology as especially high-end devices are rotated out, they're rotated into other people's use that may get great use out of a higher-end machine that may be 4 years old. They might get another 4 years out of it. We rotate them into general use areas, front counters, employee kiosks, areas that are toxic, like the wastewater plant. Sometimes they have more failures. We have these available. But we do this to help reduce, not everyone needs a new system. And so a lot of our PCs, we get 7 to 8 years out of before they're recycled and no longer relevant. And PCs have been fairly resilient in the last 5 to 8 years. It seems like our failure rate is very low. So it's been good for us, and the recycling side of things has been beneficial to the organization in saving money. Overall, the TRP plan for the year, again, you'll see we have a capital, which is those items that are $5,000 and more that have a physical value to them, like a network switch would have a physical value. We could sell it. There is money in the O&M that I have some Microsoft licenses that are probably are more like in the $60,000, $70,000 range. That shows up in the O&M because if we were to decide to quit this and all go fishing, we couldn't sell those Microsoft licenses. So they end up in the O&M. But we have $502,400 in the capital, another 43% in O&M. And again, for 883, 170, and then the elephant in the room would be adding that 10 million in, and you can see that obviously highly impacts the total for the year. Totals by department. This is kind of an informational chart. It allows you to be able to see, where the larger investments in technology are throughout the organization, from human resources, who have a sliver you can hardly see, to IT or public works in the library, who have a larger piece. Once again, if I were to add 10 million to the fire department, everybody would have a tiny piece, and poor old HR wouldn't even be found. When we look at the trend line over the years, it is by design going to fluctuate up and down. We have larger purchases that happen, big investments in things like core business enterprise software, which I'm going to get to here in the next slide, and radio systems, for instance. If we were to add that 10 million, again, you'd see a very large spike in that FY23. So again, it's represented at the bottom what that figure would be. As we look into the future and also look back to where we've been, you can see that the TRP from FY20 has continued to come down slightly. The last couple of years have been fairly level. FY24 is the next year that by nature is larger because things get pushed to the next year. And some of those items that are in FY24 will get pushed to FY25. But this year it's a little bit larger than normal, and that is because in this column we have an estimated $1 million in there for replacement of our business enterprise software, which is called Enterprise or City Suite. We also have $1 million in there for replacement of our public safety software. There is no timeline, no definite decisions, and no funding sources identified for either of those. So because of that, it's been pushed into FY24. Anything that would happen prior to that would be discussed and presented to council as part of the budgets that would be impacted by that. So in this case, it does appear to be larger. And FY25, again, has some things, people sometimes push things out for 2 years. So it seems like those next year or 2 years out seem to get larger, and then next year it may not be quite that large. The one thing I didn't mention earlier is if people are adding, this is all for replacement of existing technology. So if people are adding technology, that generally comes in the form of, okay, well, we're going to buy this new software or this new process or something or there's a need for more computers or servers. That usually comes in the form of our budget approval for new items. And then they roll into the TRP, and then they come back in a few years during their replacement life cycle and end up on the TRP for replacement. With that, I'll open the floor for questions.
All right, thank you very much. Any questions, Council? Councilmember Ronning?
Thank you. David, thank you for this information, the presentation. So one of the things that we're seeing happen in business, and probably thanks to the pandemic, but we're seeing more employees in businesses working from home. And during the pandemic, we saw city employees working from home. So how are you predicting that that's going to impact the city of Billings? Do you think that there are going to be some departments that are going to be able to have employees that work from home, and how will that impact the city?
Well, Councilmember Ronning, thank you for the question, Mayor. You know, I always said everyone ran to their rabbit holes, and then eventually we came out and saw the light and started filtering back to work. Fortunately, or unfortunately, not all city employees could do that. Some of our public first responders, public safety people, our solid waste drivers, a lot of people in the field, they didn't have that option. From an IT perspective, my staff was very fortunate to be able to take advantage of that for both the safety of individuals and of others that they would meet with. As this has unfolded and things got safer over the summer, most people working from home, a larger majority, did come back and took office hours as normal. Some departments continued to utilize work from home in various amounts of, or degrees. I can tell you that information technology has probably about half our staff work a mixed schedule between work from home and at the office. I don't believe we have anyone who works strictly from home now, where we did during the height of the pandemic, or at least prior to the last summer. And it's worked very well for IT. We're continuing, and I can only speak to our cause. I know there are other areas in the city that are having some to different degrees. We're keeping our ear open, listening to make sure we're providing the services and that people are getting the responses they need. That whole customer service, customer response thing, because that's kind of the nature of our niche in the organization. So we'll continue. We call it a fluid thing. We're not guaranteeing it to any staff, and they know it can change. But we're continuing to try to do that to reduce the amount of office space we're needing and the number of people in the office at one time for potential exposures or risk. And I can say, as an organization, we have embraced, like this evening, the virtual conferences. A lot of our meetings are done, even, half of us might be in the office and a couple out. We all just jump on a Teams meeting. We're utilizing virtual conference meetings more often, and I think other parts of the organization are, where they're more efficient, where they're not going maybe across town to join a meeting. They just do so. So I think some of the things that we learned or began utilizing during the pandemic are continuing to be used for efficiency and convenience and
Thank
safety.
you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Follow up, okay, Mr. Neese, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Dave, thanks again for putting this together. And throughout the presentation, you mentioned that this is not funded. There's not, unlike the equipment replacement plan. When I look at departments like aviation, public works, typically those are pretty well funded or funded well enough to where they plan ahead and what they need. So do you mean 100% of this is not funded, or is just certain departments not funded on this? Is this completely unfunded? I mean, has any of these departments planned for some of these expenses?
Mayor and Council Member Neese, departments can look at the TRP and they can plan for in the building of their reserves for this. But that's when they look at the items in the TRP that are coming due. Sometimes people do make judgment calls that I don't see how we will be able to afford this in the next year. And so sometimes items get pushed out. Prior to the TRP, technology wasn't necessarily guaranteed to be approved for replacement, and so as the council approves the TRP, they have the funding approval. Now, when it actually hits budget time, some people may have to make some hard decisions and choose not to do everything that's in the TRP because their budget won't support it. But however their department is funded, whether it's an enterprise, an internal service fund, a general fund, or other, they have to look at their totals in the TRP along with their other expenses in their budget and decide, can they afford this? So they have to have the funding source for this. There are some things like public safety. There's a public safety fund, and Andy could speak more to it, where money is put aside for like police and fire MDTs or different larger expenses that come up. So there is a little bit of that, but for the most part, the departments have to, and like the TRP plan fluctuates, most departments have their annual amount doesn't fluctuate a lot. Sometimes it does if they have one larger item, but they pretty much have that in their budget every year, about that same amount. Smaller department might be 10, 20,000. Someone like IT, ours fluctuates sometimes a lot because of the amount of large equipment we maintain and support. But I don't know if that answers
It doesn't.
Just a
Quick
quick
follow-up.
follow-up.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because I mean, I would prefer to see funded plans similar to the equipment replacement plan. So I guess my question to you is, would you prefer that as well? Would you like to see the technology replacement plan, a more of a funded plan, or not? And if you would, how would you go about trying to get the department heads to help fund that so that we actually start putting aside funds for these future expenses?
Council Member Neese, for many of the small expenses, and even a $1,000 computer is not a small cost, but in relation to some of the larger things, it's I guess they could put they have like I say, a pretty consistent amount each year, so their budget doesn't always fluctuate a lot. Where I see maybe the advanced funding or planning, maybe if we were to look at the plan and say, all right, these items that hit a certain threshold, whether that threshold was 20,000 or 100,000, maybe the larger items, wherever we decide that possibly there could be some work done in that area to plan for and put money aside for a multiple year period for that replacement.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Ewalt and then Councilmember Cherokee.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Dave, those radios that they got figured for 10 million, are those citywide and also venture out into the county also? Is that why it's so expensive?
Council Member Ewalt, I'm going to have to pass to I haven't been involved in those discussions as much on the radio system, so.
Yes, Councilmember Ewalt, they are citywide, but they don't go out into the county radios. It's just for city radios for different departments.
So it's not mutual aid with the fire departments and the sheriffs, it's just city, and that's it.
Yep, just city departments, correct.
Another follow-up, please. So, these are expensive, this expensive because they have to be top-notch for public safety, but do garbage truck drivers and parks department people need the same quality of radio, or could they get by with CBs, walkie-talkies, something on a lot less expensive scale?
Yeah, I can't speak to that technology, if that would mesh with the same system or not. But the other part of this is the core system, the communication hub, or what, again, beyond my scope of what I, fully understand, but this is for the kind of the core hub system also for our communication system. It's not just for the radios themselves. So that's some of that, high dollar expense that we're seeing here also.
Okay. Councilmember Cherokee.
So looking at the police contribution to this year, I see they're not getting a lot, but, or they're not replacing a lot this year. I think the number was like around 9,000. Since we have deployed the car and the body camera systems that are out there, I'm assuming that we've put into the police budget going forward a contribution to this so that we'll be able to replace them in the future.
Councilmember Cherokee, I believe that will come out of the public safety funding. That there is an account that Andy manages that is for public safety, and money does go in there each year to help offset and pay for the larger things that like MDTs in the cars and radio system and things of that nature.
Okay, follow up.
And is that also true then for the data system, the police data system that you said that we needed to replace? We're looking to the public safety mill levy.
Councilmember Cherokee, I believe that is still under discussion as to, there's a number of things. One, as to whether there's a big upgrade coming in our current system. We signed a 10-year agreement with what was called New World Systems, which has been now purchased from Tyler. The 10-year agreement ends at the end of 2023, and we can continue to pay on an annual basis or sign a new contract. They are coming with a huge, 10 years ago or 9 years ago or a little, we upgraded from what their initial flagship early 90s system was to what they had available at that time. And it was a big fundamental infrastructure change and new software, but all the same company. It was an easy, not easy, but easy compared to going to a new vendor, and made a huge step forward at that time. At this time, we're coming up on the end of that contract, and at the same time, they have what's called an enterprise system. So we're also looking at making that change if we stay with the company. As you would expect we would, the police department and others have been investigating, just kind of looking around at some of the other alternatives, looking at what some of the other communities are doing to get an understanding of maybe what their options are and get a feel for how they want to proceed as to whether we would continue with the existing company, which we could do so without competitively bidding because it's an upgrade to our existing, or whether we want to go out and RFP. So there's some of those big decisions that need to be made and then as that happens, I'm sure they'll be looking at funding sources and timeframes, and that could mean sometime in the next fiscal year from now, or it could mean 2 years from now. It is no easy task to select or upgrade or change to a new public safety system. As we all know, it impacts so many different people, from 911, police and fire, jail, sheriff's department, other community law enforcement, the college, the airport. It just has so much huge impact that ripples across our entire organization and community.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other question? Any other questions, Council? Mr. Watterson, thank you very much for your presentation. There may be another question among the audience here. I'd like to open it up for public comment. Anyone like to speak on public comment? Anyone like to speak? Public comment is closed. Council, any other questions to move on? Okay. Okay, Mr. Zeller, you have the floor. Mr. Iflin, I don't know if you need to introduce Mr. Zeller or anything. We good?
Deputy Mayor, I think we're good, and we might be looking at adding Andy to the IT department because he seems to be functioning pretty well up there, so.
Got it, yeah. Uh-oh. Don't, no, you spoke too soon now.
I wanted to use a pointer. I hope this all works.
Sweet. Good evening, Mayor, or Deputy Mayor and City Council, and those watching on Zoom. This evening, we're going to talk about the South Billings Urban Renewal District, specifically a bond issue, oh man, to potentially extend the life of the district. Thanks, Kevin.
I changed it to pointer options and now it doesn't work. Let's see if that works.
Some way. There we go. So we're going to discuss the state statute on TIF district lives, then specifically how it applies to the South Billings district, and then why we're talking about it tonight, which is the rec center project. And there's quite a few pieces here that go together, so bear with me as we kind of go through this. It does all tie together. I don't need staff direction tonight, but you will be seeing something coming to you on November 22nd as a result of this, but we'll get to that. Here's really where I wanted that pointer. There we go, I got a pointer right there. So the statute in Montana, when we create a TIF district, there's a clock that starts ticking, and that's represented here by this green bar that is 15 years. So within those first 15 years, the City Council can issue bonds for in this case, the South Billings Urban Renewal District, and you can issue 25-year term bonds. If you didn't issue bonds in those 15 years, your district would sunset at the end of that 15th year. However, we did issue bonds in fiscal year 17 was our most recent one. They were 25-year term bonds. So that final payment will happen in fiscal year 2041, which means the sunset of the South Billings district is in 2041. You have an opportunity to issue bonds up through the end of calendar year 22, which is technically the final date of that 15th year, where you could issue 25-year term bonds to extend this to the full maximum time allowed under statute. After that date, December, I think it's 10th, 2022, you cannot issue 25-year term bonds. What that means is you can issue bonds in this blue time here, but you can't extend the life of the district. So if you issued bonds in 2037, you could only issue bonds for the last 5 years there, or 4 years. What does this really all mean? Well, essentially what you're doing is if you don't issue 25-year term bonds extending the life of the district to the fully maximum allowed by statute, you're leaving on the table the opportunity to capture this increment, which you may or may not want to do, but you should be aware that you are doing that. I'm going to switch to this one here. I've condensed years 24 to 40 since they all look the same, and maybe it's a little easier to read. I just want to show you this. So you're leaving 5 years on the table, okay? And currently we bring in about $4 million a year in increment revenue. In the upcoming CIP that you will see, and you have seen, it includes construction or a planned construction of a South Billings rec center. That project, you've had previous estimates that range from $35 to $102 million. Currently in the process of narrowing that scope, identifying a much more, a smaller range, I'll say. But That project is not slated to be under construction until after that 15th year, so in year 17. So if you want to capture the most amount possible for this project or any other project, but namely this one, you will want to issue bonds here to extend the life so you can borrow against these final remaining years. What does that mean in dollars? So if we were, I'm going to back up here, I think it works better. If we were to, in year 17, issue 17-year bonds, because we could do that, our estimates are you could borrow about $30 million. If you were in year 17, because you extended the life of the district, able to issue 25-year term bonds or 23-year term bonds, it would take that number up to about 40 million. So that means you could build a bigger project. You could do more of this project with tax increment bonds rather than any other funding source, which likely would have to be a GO bond or contributions of some sort. So what we would recommend to council and what you will see eventually is to issue a small bond now, $2 to $3 million for the unimproved streets project, which was into FY22 CIP. That project was originally planned to be funded with cash, so we would make a recommendation to you guys to borrow money to do that. That would extend the district out to the maximum time allowed. That would allow the timeline for the rec center to go on as planned, and they wouldn't be under the gun as much because as each year passes, we lose funding capacity or bonding capacity that we'd have to otherwise make up either by reducing the size of the project or finding another funding source. Some of the pros and cons I wanted to just highlight here. Again, it maintains funding options to the future and reduces an amount from another funding source. The con here obviously is that, well, maybe not obviously, but we would incur interest expense that we otherwise wouldn't. We're planning on using cash for these unimproved street projects, but if you borrow, you're going to have to pay borrowing cost, interest cost, probably about $1 million, $1.5 million over the life of those bonds because it's so big. This is very similar, if not identical, to what we did downtown a few years ago to convert the streets to two-way. So the next steps, tomorrow night, the SBRO board will make a formal vote on whether to recommend this or not. And I see Jim is here tonight to talk about that. On November 22nd, you will see the first of many actions, potentially. It's a reimbursement resolution. You typically see these when you need to approve a reimbursement resolution in cases where we are going to use cash to do a project and then eventually sell bonds to reimburse ourselves for those projects. So while it's not a binding action in that you do not have to sell bonds, we do have to do that if we want to sell bonds to reimburse ourselves. So on November 22nd, that resolution will be on your meeting. If that's approved, then we will bring back a parameters resolution in the first half of 2022 for council to approve. And then if that's approved, we'll go out and negotiate a bond sale, sell bonds, and bring back the final documents later in the year to be finalized with council. And I think, yes, that's all I have for this evening, and I'm happy to go back to any slides or answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Zeller. Any questions? Okay, Councilmember Ronning and then Councilmember Neese.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. And thank you to the SBRO board and Jim for doing such a good job. You met with a number of us individually and really walked us through this information previously as well. So thank you for that. So Andy, in regard to the bonds, so the street projects that were intended to be paid for with cash. With the bonds, am I understanding correctly that if we do go out for those bonds, that we can pay that back early, right? I mean, we don't have to, or do we have to pay it back during the time frame that's set with those bonds?
Councilmember Ronning, so typically when we sell bonds, we cannot prepay within the first 10 years. That's in order to get people to actually loan us money because they don't want to loan it and then get paid back right away. However, the statute requires that, or says that when your final bond payment is done, that's when your district sunsets. So we wouldn't want to pay them off unless there was another set of bonds outstanding, so sooner than the rec center went out. But you could, at that 10-year mark, if you had cash on hand, pay them off.
All right,
Yes.
follow-up?
Yeah.
Okay.
So are you saying, because this isn't not quite how I understood it, but are you saying that at the end of that 10-year mark, we could pay that off, but would the time frame for the SBRA continue, or would it end at that 10 years that you paid it off?
My understanding is it would continue if you had other bonds outstanding.
Okay, other bonds, all right.
If you did
Yeah,
not,
you
it
said that.
would terminate.
Okay, perfect, all right, thank you.
Good question. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Andy, you mentioned during your, the timeline that we're doing something in November, resolution or some sort, but then you said in January of 2022, the council is going to be voting on something else. We'll have a new council at that time. I don't know what the flavor of the council is going to be on that. What impact would that be if they were to turn that down in 2022? Would that kind of mess up the whole bond issue?
Councilmember Neese, yes, if that council decides not to approve a parameters resolution, which is really when, essentially what that is you guys say, all right, Andy, go out, and as long as the interest rate is less than, 25%, and you borrow less than, $100 million, you can go ahead and do this. You set the parameters for me to go out and borrow the money. That's the binding action. So if that council denies that, then we don't go out and sell bonds.
So the work would, excuse me, Mayor, to follow up? So the work would have to be done then paid with cash, is that?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I don't see any. Councilmember Ronnie?
He caused me to think of a question. So and thank you so much for letting me ask this. So, but first steps, before we get to that parameters resolution, first step is we would have to pass that, this council would have to pass the November 22nd reimbursement resolution, is that correct? Or do we?
Councilmember Ronning, I would like to have that parameters resolution approved before you guys award the bid for the construction. I don't know what the timeline is on construction, and frankly, until this had kind of come up about a month ago or so, I hadn't really been thinking about it with respect to construction costs. I don't want to delay Public Works project at all, and so this parameters resolution will allow me to sell bonds independently of the construction project.
Okay, I think I get that part. But is the parameters resolution, that one's the one that you said early part of 2022?
Sorry, yep.
Or is the reimbursement resolution the same thing as a parameters? Okay,
No, those are
I think so.
separate. So,
Okay.
the parameters resolution will be early 2022.
Okay, but this November 22nd, we do have to do that first, correct? Or
Yes.
are they not related?
Yeah, if we don't do that November 22nd one, we cannot reimburse ourselves for costs.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Zeller. Good question. Very good question. Okay, I'd like to turn this over to the public. Anyone, you have 3 minutes to present. Would there be anyone like to give a public comment? If you want to, ask.
Kevin Nelson, 4235 Bruce Avenue. Not opposed, not against, or not for it or really against it, just some questions. If, could you bond in public these bonds at a later date? I mean, if you're just going to extend the district and just bond, you're not bonding the entire project cost. You're just saying we just want to get a foothold at an arbitrary number. So you're not saying we're bonding the whole district. We're just going to say we want a 2 million, a 3 million, whatever we need to just extend the district. So you could do that at a later date, it seems to me. By then you would have possibly have the cost of the rec center maybe a little more closely aligned by next fall, and it may not be necessary to extend the district. You know, like I live in a TIF district, of course, but also I'm a taxpayer. You know, at some point you have to be fiduciarily responsible not only to the other taxing jurisdictions, including your own. I mean, the city of Billings is losing money, or money is being diverted, city money, school money, county money. So there's other taxing jurisdictions. So one of the things I'd ask is, if you're going to extend the district into 43, why not you just say we're going to limit the district's ability only to secure revenue necessary to pay bond costs for those last final years, and then the incremental money that's collected beyond what necessary to cover the bond costs is distributed back to the taxing jurisdictions from where it was taken. And that seems fair to me. But another alarming thing is you say $3 million in bonds is going to cost $1.8 million over time. I mean, that seems like an awful steep cost for $3 million. I mean, if that's what it really costs to borrow money now, you're going to borrow $3 million and it says right here it's going to cost us $1.8 million over the life of the bond for interest. So what happens if you got a 25-year bond? Well, let's just go back to a 20-year bond for the rec center, and what would it cost, save us in interest and cost of that bond? I mean, it might be surprising. You may only want a 20-year bond because of the extra cost of that extra 5 years of interest and bond costs that could be extremely expensive. You know, it's a big difference between borrowing $30 million and $110 million. Maybe something in the middle, a 20-year bond would be sufficient with the revenues you've already got. You know, it seems you're just not critically thinking through this process right now. You're just sort of jumping at the gun here. He just said, well, we thought about it a month ago. Really? You're thinking about a month ago and you're going to try to go out 25 years? I mean, you probably need a little more critical thought here and a little more got to think through this just a bit more, I would think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Okay, would anybody else like to give public comment? Anyone else like to give public comment? Anyone else? Okay, public comment is closed. Council, any other questions on this? I see none. Okay, Mr. Neese, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I was wanting to give Sabura a chance to speak to this if they had an opportunity and wanted to. Thank you.
I didn't know if it was a comment or separate or whatever. Yes, Andy did an excellent job of basically laying out the options that we need to have on a going forward basis. If there's something on a big picture basis that you folks probably need to take with you is, number one, at this point in time, as far as the rec center is concerned, there are a whole lot of variables in terms of what's going to be built, when it's going to be built, how it's going to be built. We don't have line of sight to a dollar amount. What we do know is what Sabura can afford and can't afford, looking at what our revenues and expenses are going to be over the next few years. And I've done quite a bit of work on that. The other thing that is very important to keep in mind here is Andy chose an excellent title, and that is options. What this does is it leaves a whole lot of options open to us. If we don't do this, then we're saying we're limited and say, if we start building in, say, 23 or 24, we're limited to just $30 million or perhaps less. It depends on what our advisor says. So what this does do is it gives us the opportunity to say, okay, and I'll just give you a what if, just for the sake of argument, is that, well, you know, for $2 or $3 more million, and again, I'm just making this up, the rec center could have such and such feature, daycare, something, I don't know. It may be able for us to add on to something like that. So what it does do is it keeps a number of design items still on the table. Now, in terms of options, you know, down the road, you know, you get down 15 years down the road. It's the council's option at any point in time is that we can pay those bonds off. I mean, there is a certain, you know, I think Andy said a 10-year minimum is that we can't call the bonds. After that, you know, all the options are open. We can do that, you know. So, and when doing that, well, then, you know, the extra interest, you know, that we're talking about, and that's assuming that this thing extends out to 2040, what, Andy? 2044, somewhere around there. I'll be real old when that happens. But that option's there. We can make those payments and call those bonds at any time. It could be 10 years down the road. So what it does do is it gives us a lot of tools right now in terms of getting a rec center built it keeps us a lot of tools available. The other thing to keep in mind, also from the Suburra standpoint, is that we know of some very big projects outside of the rec center that are possibly coming to the South TIF in the coming years. We know that they're out there. Unfortunately, I can't go into details, but it leaves us the option to be able to contribute to those projects as well and not be, for lack of better words, house poor. We don't want to have to put all our dollars into just the rec center and say, oh, well, sorry, we can't do anything else. It gives us a lot of flexibility. So very, very quickly, that's kind of like the Suburra's attitude on this.
Thank you. All right, questions? Councilmember Joy first.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Yakovich. I just wanted to ask a question, and I think, the agenda is specific about this being district bond issue and district life, but I think if we're talking about bonds and we're talking about interest, I think it might be relevant to ask, what will be some of the returns on this investment if we go forward and leverage the $4 million that we already collect per year, but leverage that through bonds? What are some of the returns that Billings and South Billings will see on that money? Thank you.
If I'm understanding your, Councilmember Joy, if I'm understanding your question correctly, is the benefits here is I can tell you right now that in terms of the real estate in and around that area will definitely have a positive impact. And I don't necessarily want to say the more we build, the more the impact will be. But the fact is if we do have a recreation center that serves a large percentage of the citizenry, is that those property values are going to go up. We also know that some of the commercial properties, I can't swear to this 100%, but I know that there's been some movement recently in terms of people buying vacant land over near like Costco, that area, Miller's Crossing area. Plus, there's some other discussions of other people that want to put their land up for sale and their property up for sale. So this definitely does have a return. Now, Councilman, I can't put a percentage or nothing on it. What I can talk is in terms of big picture things that are going to happen. And the more thought we put into the rec center, as well as the money, is that the more people get a chance to use the rec center, the more that it's going to benefit each and every member of this community. And when that happens just by a linkage is that the values go up and it becomes such a win-win-win for everybody around.
Thank you.
I don't want to say we want to necessarily put $40 million in there because we have to put pencil to paper, but the impact of this is going to be enormous. I think so.
Thank you. Good. No follow-up. Okay, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you for answering my question before. I appreciate you giving us a little bit of insight into it. But I did have a question, and this may be for you or Andy, but just to kind of help address the public comment about financing a lesser amount and still achieving the goal of extending the district out. Is there a reason why you wouldn't do $500,000 bond to go out that term, or $1 million bond, something lesser to you're not spending so much on interest, and then later on, if you need a bond, you can get a larger bond?
Councilmember Neese, all of those are on the table. We don't, in terms of, I can't speak for my board, but what I would say is that we're not going to borrow any more than we need to. And yes, if we get a better interest rate, having it over a shorter time period, we can do that. And issuing these bonds right here gives us the latitude to be able to say, well, to give you folks the option to say, if we do 20-year bonds, this is what it will look like. If we do 15-year bonds, this is what it would look like. And you'd have a choice in the matter. If we didn't do this, then we could say, well, we can only do, 15 or 17-year bonds. It just puts more, gives you folks more of a role in the decision-making.
Okay.
Thank you.
Follow. Okay. Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Pulling together Mr. Nelson and Councilmember Joy's statements, Mr. Nelson's were, this is a tax on all taxpayers in the city, not just Suburra. because whatever that 4 million gets pulled out, everybody else has to help make it up. And Councilmember Joyce, who benefits from this, I'm having a hard time figuring out how the Heights, which is 10, 15 miles away, is going to get much benefit out of it, but they're also helping pay for it.
Is that a question or just a comment?
No, can I finish, please?
Sure.
We're not going to get out of here by 7 o'clock. So how do you speak to the people that I represent in the Heights? How do you speak to them, how fair this is, and how much they're going to benefit from it?
Well, Councilmember Ewalt, with all due respect, I think you and I have a different take on how this is actually, how the TIF district impacts the entire city. You claim that everybody else has to make up for it. I disagree. I think that the for a right now situation is that there's roughly $4 million that comes from the tax increment funds, and it's dollars that are there that wouldn't have been there had we not made investments in infrastructure. So I just think that in terms of, the big picture, your question is what I'm reading is that, does this benefit the Heights? Yes, it does. It does give them the ability in terms of another place to play basketball, to swim, to play hockey, all of those things. And the good part about this is that we don't necessarily, this is in a situation where we issue bonds. We don't have to go to a citywide GO bonds. We don't have to raise taxes on anybody.
Follow up, Mr. Ewald? Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you, I do. So Jim, in your experience, do students at Skyview compete in basketball? Do they compete in swimming? Do they compete in other sports? So Heights, kids that go out to the Heights, they're going to compete in all of these things that would potentially be held at the rec center?
Yes,
the state level?
Councilmember Ronnie, what we've heard over and over and over and over again is that there isn't enough space for volleyball, for basketball, for all of the things that go on a court. There's talk, the issue with the ice rink is that it's dilapidated and doesn't have much time. All people, including people that live in the Heights, have that opportunity to use that they wouldn't have already.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Jim, I agree. I mean, this is something that we kind of have to do, but I'm a little disappointed, honestly. I mean, the rec center we've been talking about for a couple of years, and it doesn't seem like we're any closer to any numbers or anything else. And my hope was that we'd be kind of putting a bond together by now for that rec center, so this wouldn't be necessary. But we're not there. And I'm kind of feeling, is the rec center just kind of a bait and hook kind of thing nowadays?
No, sir. No.
Okay, let's put that out there so that we can extend it out.
No.
And I'm not, no accusations or anything like that. It's just, seems like it's just dragging out there and no progress.
Yeah, Councilmember Brown, this project languished for a while. And quite honestly, as we've been to council before, it was the Sabura board that said, basically we said in January, are we going to do this thing or not? And so we said, let's do it. So this thing has been kick-started by quite a bit of work by myself and the Recreation Committee for Sabura. We've met basically every week doing a lot of consensus building. And it was us that basically got this thing kick-started. And the idea that, that we've been able to share with everybody is we have, the best news in all this is that we have a significant amount of dollars that we can bond. We can do that. And so the idea is that let's do this. Let's do this, and instead of, $100 million would scare anybody for a rec center. We get that, but why not start with what you can do? And so, what the consensus among my board is, it's not a question of if we'll do it; it's how much and when. And the idea right now, we have a RFP that's out for selection in terms of a design a design team. That'll be voted on fairly soon here, and then we'll have a steering committee. And one of the things that I've been pushing for that I think needs to happen is a definite timeline so we can share that with folks like you. Is to, given a reasonability in all this, is we can come to City Council and we can say, we anticipate putting a shovel in the ground and getting a picture by thus and such date. And that's what we want to be able to do, is share with you and with City Council.
I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Any other comments, questions? All right, thank you. Council, we'll move on to our next item. Ms. Mailing, and while you come up, I'm turning the gavel back over to the mayor. Thank you, Council, for your patience with me. I hope I didn't rush you too quickly.
Awesome.
Good job. I was just assuming that Mr. Tillman was commenting on the methane gas agreement, and we're done. Is that not the case? Okay. All right, well, that must mean that we're on item number 5, and thank you, Council, for your getting through as much as you did. We had an important dinner with a lot of law enforcement officials. I think made some good progress for Billings. So thank you, and I'll get a full update on what you did on your first 4 items earlier. The next item up is then the Bloomberg Asphalt Art Grant. Our Public Works Director, Debbie Melling, and Zach is in the audience also with the Bird will be here to make a presentation or answer questions as well. So Debbie.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So yes, I'm here to talk about the Bloomberg Asphalt Art Grant. And there's 2 parts to this, and we'll be back in a future action, I believe November 8th, with the actual formal action that you'll vote on. So tonight is just information on that action. So this grant comes from Bloomberg Philanthropies, and it's a grant that is designed to help communities use art to change the way people interact with their infrastructure. So in this particular case, it's painting streets and crosswalks and that sort of thing. So the Bird, in cooperation with Mayor Cole, put together a grant application for this with some ideas about what it could entail. And then the City of Billings was awarded $25,000 for this. And I believe it was one of, well, I know it was one of 26 cities that were granted this opportunity. So again, it really applies to street art and crosswalk art. And so the details of this work really are, like I said, the crosswalk and the streets. Crosswalks are a little difficult. Both federal highways and Montana Department of Transportation recommend that we do not paint our crosswalks. The City of Billings has historically said we would not paint crosswalks, and the reason behind it is that people need to expect to see a black and white ladder when they go to cross streets. It's anticipated, it helps drivers, it helps pedestrians. It's one of those safety things we really have not varied from, and it's not recommended that we do. So that one, we're gonna have to probably put some of that grant money into more of the street painting. So the grant did include both, but the crosswalks will be a little bit difficult, if not impossible to do. So what a way to start a presentation, huh? Aw, can't do anything. So the streets, this is the good part. So the content will be put together, what the art is, will be put together with some community participation. Really something that can show off what our community is and what that part of our community entails. So it'll be something that has a lot of participation in it, and you will see that as we move on. And it's going to be on North 19th, between 6th and 8th. So it's right between the Explorers Academy and North Park. I've got where the parking is, and then the pin there, the red pin. So that street is the one that we're looking at doing. And there is maintenance budgeted in the grant, but we're looking at about a 2 to 3 year lifespan on this piece of art, or these pieces of art. So here's an example of some art that was done. I'm going to go through some of these, but Zach is here and he may talk. He probably will expand on a lot of these a little bit, so I'll just touch on them briefly. But the selection process, we've got here Montana State University Billings Art Department. So there's going to be, like I said, that coordination with the community. The installation, several listed here, including the Bird members, the task force, and the City of Billings. Data and reporting is going to be done by Healthy by Design. which they've done a lot of that in the past on different grants. They're very good at it. And the committee that will be working on it is Zach from the Bird, and then a few other people in conjunction with Public Works, and we'll work with them to make sure that what is put on the ground is appropriate and sustainable. And that's mostly what Zach will talk about, so I went through it pretty quickly, but he'll touch on it more. So the timeline for this, you can see here, we put in for it back earlier this year and should have it done following this in the first part or mid-year 22. So the second part of this is that the city code doesn't allow any kind of painting or chalk on any sidewalk or street in the city without your permission. This is something that when we change the city code, this is one of them we really need to change, but it's in there. So we need to have a resolution allowing the street to be painted. So on November 8th, you will get a resolution in front of you. It's narrow, it defines this project only, and it puts together some guidelines as to what the art has to be. There has been quite a lot of stir around the nation about art on streets. A lot of places have used it kind of for free speech and, some political statements and that kind of thing. We are not going to get into that here. It will be geometrics and art only. It won't be symbols that define a certain organization or anything like that. It's going to be just strictly art, and we're going to try very hard to keep to that. So that's what you'll see in that resolution that is on your agenda, which was published today, so you have a copy of the resolution. But it kind of defines what we're looking at here. So that's it for me. I know Zach has some things, so I figured before questions, if that's all right, maybe Zach can fill in some blanks.
That'd be great. Zach Tarakitis, you want to add? This is for later discussion.
Like that one?
Yeah, that's great. So this is the Asphalt Art Guide provided by the Bloomberg Foundation. Mayor Cole and I caught up on this early, well, it was the end of March. We had about 2 weeks till we caught up on this. And the really great part that was inspiring about this at the front end is that this is only the second round of grants that they've ever given out, the Bloomberg Foundation, nationally. And so one of 26 selected this year, but there were only 15 selected the year prior. So we're on a pretty short list of cities that get national recognition for efforts that made across the country, and will be included in this next year, which I think is pretty exciting to see that we'll be alongside a lot of other large cities. And we're only one of two cities in the West. The Rocky Mountain West is here in Reno, and that's pretty much it. Otherwise, a lot of them are in the Midwest and the East Coast. So we did try to reach out to a lot of local community partners to make sure this is a feasible idea. We looked at Montana Avenue, some possibilities down there as well. But again, we were running into the crosswalk concept and also working with MDT on that. Probably would have been a little bit more challenging on that thoroughfare. But 19th is a community area. Explorers Academy has really been growing and great services. The community centers there, and also just activating more of North Park's relationship with the Bird is really important to us because they have a lot of humans up there and we don't have as many as in the Bird, and we want to make sure there's some connectivity between the two. So, any questions?
Questions for Zach or Debbie? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just as kind of a question, having heard a lot about different grants, was this a competitive grant? What was the grant process? Not that it's particularly important, but I was kind of curious. Was it a competitive type grant? Thank you.
Part of it may have been the timeline. It was pretty quick. We found about it quickly and got after it. But I think they're looking for pretty specific projects for what they're trying to accomplish in 3 different categories. Safety, connectivity, and there's a lot of data collection that goes along with it. They really want to understand the impact that it has. So I would say if you want to do public art, this is probably not the easiest route, other than the fact that they do fund it well. That we could have done this in different ways and figured out different funding. Our board's been very excited for it. We're looking to raise a matching grant for that, to maybe possibly do this twice in the same time period once we have something in place to do that. So I think it's competitive in the fact that you've got to be pretty willing to do this in your community, because they do have a lot of metrics. And you saw on the one slide where we have check-ins pretty regularly, where I don't think they realize I'm one guy in an office managing this, and they have a whole crew of folks that are managing different portions of it. So, yeah, so I would say it's competitive in that way.
And I believe the numbers, correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, is that between 200 and 300 cities applied for this grant, and 26 ended up with it. Most of those were larger cities. It had to involve the mayor, and so, yeah, great job, Zach. Definitely competitive. Councilmember Brown?
Yeah, I apologize. I've not researched this very deep at all. So what's the lifespan of something like this and the maintenance involved going forward?
I walked this with Chris Hertz, one of our engineers, prior, and we actually wanted to make sure that the lifespan of the piece was in line with when they were going to resurface. And he said, we're scheduled to resurface that in 2 to 5 years. And we said, that's great, because ideally you resurface and you have the opportunity to either do the project again or to move the project to another location and keep that activation around what's going on. And hopefully have created some new habits that go beyond the art to where there's easier getting back and forth. If the times I've taken anybody over to North Park, the lunchtime traffic from FIB coming across the street to use North Park and some other partners we have there, Bell Chemicals, one of our TIF applicants, I mean, all of their staff are actively around that park regularly. So if we can create some more opportunities that way, I think that it'll stay. So we did coordinate to make sure that it's not going to be on, 2 to 3 years, and then we'll reset that intentionally.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Any other questions for Zach? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Zach, I guess in the location, I don't know if you can get the map up there again. It doesn't look like there's any residents around there. So would this cover the entire street, the parking areas? I mean, so the actual spot is from the red indicator below just up to 7th Avenue. Reason being is that there is a housing apartment, the Big Sky Apartments there. They're a really well-maintained lower income population apartment complex that we want to engage with as well. And they have a great relationship with Head Start. So we anticipate them also being part of what goes on. We have also had, I guess specific to that location was, we also had included the crosswalks on 18th and the Hawk Crossing that's between 20th and 21st. The idea was, again, to get a different type of mode of transportation getting across with people walking and biking. But again, using the metrics to get across those large lanes, that many lanes, is really difficult. So it was beyond that, but I think the connectivity, Explorers Academy is over at the park quite often, as well as folks on that side. The other thing that we had added, and I think this added to our application, is there's not a lot of cities that have a feature like we do with the rims. So the art piece itself, we had the tree project in place, and we need a lot of trees in our neighborhood, but the opportunity we have right now is that you can look into our neighborhood directly from up on top of the rim. So we're trying to get artists to look at a piece that can be engaged from on the ground, but then as you're walking along the rims, you can look into our neighborhood and see the art and interact with it that way as well, which is kind of a creative way of looking at how many cities have that opportunity. So that's why this was selected, because you can see it clearly from up there as well. And it's a quiet street.
Quick follow-up. Sure. So the cities that have done this, and I don't know if it's brand new, so they don't know this, but have they done this? How long do they last? And then if they do decide to move it, do they just, like you say, just repave over it? Or do they have to, how do they clean it up after there's tire tracks through it and all kinds of stuff?
So our orientation was last week with Bloomberg, and they showed one in Kansas City where it was a bump out of a lot of the corners. It was a shrinking to quiet the traffic, and they had a big mural in the center. And they realized immediately, like, they had used the wrong type of paint because it was gone in 8 months. The centerpiece was. The corners were there longer, and they realized they had to maintain it. But the nice part about their guide is that material costs, types of materials, where they should be, where they've been used, they actually have a year to start to refer back to that, to how long would these things last. The large one we saw on the earlier slide is, I want to say, in Chicago, and it's in a park, and it's been abandoned lately, and so it's used for events and activities, so the lifespan on that is much longer, but they still redo it every 2 years just because it's a public art activity. So that piece right there. So it gets done quite often. So there's a huge range. Some of these are simply one crosswalk in a city. So there's a pretty huge range and a lot of data to give us an idea and samples of what materials we should use and not use.
Okay, Marin, if you mind, one more question? Sure. So, and thank you for bringing this up, because I was going to ask about this. So when this is all done, this is a street, cars are going to be going up and down here. Have they had any trouble with kids like playing in the street, because this looks more like a playground than a street? And then, I mean, how do you protect the pedestrians and cars traveling and kind of invites them to play out in the middle of the street?
It does. There is a crosswalk right there that's the intentional crosswalk going on there that we're going to stop before that. And I think that the Bloomberg Foundation has massive amounts of data on this. They've been doing this, not this type of grant-making process, but the tracking of this particular public use of public art for quite some time. And I can send you a ton of links. I mean, I've been amazed at the amount of data they have on it. So they're pretty confident, and that's why they're investing in it, is the opportunities for enhancing a community are much greater than what they're seeing as problematic. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything else? Councilmember Rewalt.
Thank you, Mayor. Zach, when they paint that on there, then is that the full 25,000 from 6th to 7th?
Well, we had also included the other crosswalks that were in there, but currently we've been awarded the full 25, and they give us a lot of flexibility with how that goes down. So if we need to increase some of that for maintenance or something else, like the money will be here next week, and they're like, figure out how that's going to get used, because there's probably unforeseen things in there.
It's probably not going to be done this year, but...
No, next year.
Yeah, so you spend it next year on that one art project, and then he says, well, we got to recode it or we got to redo it. Is this a repetitive grant that runs year after year to be able to do that?
We could apply for it again. But I mean, like I said, our boards, we're currently, and you'll see in our next meeting, we have it on our agenda of, how they wanted to raise another 25,000 to duplicate this, either at the same time or the year after. I mean, they're very excited for the fact that we could have this in our neighborhood. So, I mean, the intent is to continue and hopefully generate, we've talked about everything from how far down the rims could you walk and see them in different neighborhoods, to where it would be a whole different aspect of engaging with the community. We'd look out into the natural world we can see from the rims, to the Priors and beyond. But locally, I mean, we have beautiful trees and everything else, but if there was art throughout the neighborhood as you're hiking along the rims, you could look down in and see something unique. So I think they have a little bit bigger vision that we got to get one done and then have an idea of how that gets done otherwise.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. Thank you, Zach. This is awesome. Thanks for bringing it to the community as well. This is really exciting. So in regard to the art selection process, Montana State University Billings Art Department, is this going to be something that artists from all throughout the world, or just Montana, or so just artists just in Montana that are recognized in Montana, or they have to live in Montana? Who's getting to submit to this? And then the art department, is that the professors? Is it part of the student body? Who is it that gets to decide? Thank you.
First answer is we'd like to keep it local as we can. We've been working with one local artist to help us develop the potential system for this with ideas on art, so that, what's the feasibility? Secondly, we want to make it competitive, because they're not doing a piece of art. It's a managed community experience. So they're going to have to design a piece that is simple enough that people can be out doing this. And so we're going to make sure that that's very clear in the handout. Working with MSU, I've been working with our professors at this point, but the goal is, with my experience with the gallery, is to teach kids how to jury a situation. So we're going to have very clear parameters. These are going to be regional artists that can apply, can they manage a project to this extent? Why do you select a particular artist over another artist? What represents the region, so forth and so on. So it's definitely a juried process. We want to educate the students through the process. We may not have the perfect process coming out of it, but we've already been working on an artist to kind of line that out.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Trachey. Then we'll move to some public comment.
Director Mewing, I think I heard you say that painting crosswalks is no longer considered safe.
Yes, painting them anything but white and black. So the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, has stated that is how a crosswalk should be. So it's easily recognizable, and drivers and pedestrians alike know what they're looking at. So yes, it's currently frowned on to paint them anything but black and white.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilor Rewalt?
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, please. So if that's the case, could you explain the stamped bricks on Montana Avenue?
They're 50 years old.
No, they're not that old.
Example, the only reason, there's different things. I don't think we'd put stamped bricks on a street again because the pattern is difficult to walk in. It doesn't fit with the MUTCD anymore, so those are pretty old. Not something we would probably do now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll open up for public comment. While people are coming forward, if you'd like to, please keep your comments to 3 minutes. Tell us your name and address. While we're waiting, I'll just kind of comment. 2017, I was involved with a Bloomberg Philanthropies project and program, and it's quite an organization. I think over the years they have given close to $2 billion with a B to cities. And this is the first project in Montana, and so it's certainly my hope that we will be able to, as the largest city, nurture a relationship with that organization where this could be the beginning of even bigger and better things. No guarantees, but that'd certainly be the hope. Nobody was rushing the podium, so I guess we will close the period for public comment and move on to our next item, which is the item number 6, methane gas agreement with MDU. So back to Debbie, and I believe we have an MDU representative as well, who can will also have a presentation as part of this evening. Debbie.
Good evening again. So yes, methane gas agreement at the landfill. As most of you know, we've had an agreement for since 2010 or the last 10 plus years. And it's been extremely beneficial to the city, to MDU, to the environment. I mean, we're taking methane gas that we're creating and we're doing something beneficial with it. So when we talked about the Energy Commission and the LEED certification that we're looking at, this is a big part of why. We're looking at things like this that can make beneficial use out of things that typically aren't great. So it's been a good thing. We need to update it. But like I said, we've been in a partnership with Montana Dakota Utilities since 2010. We actually entered into an agreement in 2008, but the facilities were completed in 2010, and that's when the partnership started. We do have Larry Oswald with MDU with us tonight, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of this. So in the last 10 years, we've received over $3 million in revenue, and all of that money has went to the general fund. Talk about that on slide 8. So the one big difference is that this didn't include any regulatory issues. Up until very recently, we didn't have air emissions limits at our landfill because of our size and the amount of methane that we were generating, and now we do. So none of this current agreement deals with any of that, and that's one of the reasons that we're looking at something new. Whoops, and sorry, it renewed in December of 2020. So we do have a 10-year agreement, but it doesn't address almost anything that we need to have in there at this point. So we are redoing the agreement, and it'll take the place of what we have in place at this time. So this, I didn't know where to fit this, so it's just really, when I think about natural gas and what we're doing out there, I just wanted to go through a recap of what the process is so that you're aware of what we're doing. So MDU built a plant that basically produces the pipeline quality gas from our methane. So methane is created anytime you have a landfill from organics that are buried, and then they break down, and they start off gassing methane. So they take that, they process it in the plant, create pipeline grade gas, and you can see they transport it through pipelines, that kind of thing, goes into the market, and Larry can talk a lot more about this, but basically it goes to the RINs market for sale. So that's just history and kind of a little bit of overview of what we do. So this is not a great map. What we did is we hired a firm to come out, and they flew it, and they were able to pick up emissions. This is not the same as going out with a ground monitor and figuring out exactly what it is. But what this did is it gave us a good idea. Are we exceeding the kind of numbers we're going to have to hit under our new Title V permit? And the answer is yes. The red, the orange, and the yellow are all exceeding. Anything over 500 is exceeding what we will have for limits. We don't have now, but it's what we will have. So you can see we've got a lot of work to do on site. And so what changed, like I said, from 2010, in the Clean Air Act, there are limits for emissions if you have a landfill that is a certain size and creating a certain amount of methane. And it's called an NMOC number. 50 is the trigger, and we hit it in January of 20. So really what changed for us is we now have air quality limits regulated by DEQ, and we don't meet them. So we went back to look, what do we need to do? And really there's multiple things. We have completed cells on the landfill that are done. They've got a cap on them. We don't operate them anymore. We do not have wells in all of those locations. We need to get production wells in those. We also need to get compliance wells in those. So the type of methane that comes out, the quality of the methane that comes out dictates whether it can be processed or not. We have a lot of areas that are too close to the edges that pull too much oxygen, and they really can't be used by MDU. So we need to install production wells where we can, compliance wells where we can't, and then those systems have to be functional sooner rather than later. And then in our operational wells where we're currently working, we need to start putting in horizontal wells. We've never done that before. We've waited till the cell is completely done, and then we put vertical wells in to start collecting that gas. We don't have that option anymore. As you can see on the map, most of those exceedances are in our operating cells. So we're gonna have to change our operations to start installing wells as we go along. The other thing is a compliance flare. Like I said, there's an awful lot of the methane that cannot be used to create pipeline quality gas, so we're just gonna have to flare some of it. Plant upgrades, that is gonna be MDU's project to basically take the plant they have now and increase it size-wise, and as far as I think there's some process work that has to be done. That's where Larry's gonna talk a little bit more. And then we have monitoring and reporting requirements that we'll have to start doing. So the big date for us is June 30 of 2022. That's coming up really, really soon. So the new agreement that we're looking at has, and I'm just going to walk through very quickly what we think this agreement will have in it. These are the pieces that we basically hammered out with MDU. We don't have words to it yet, so you haven't seen the agreement. This is just a skeleton kind of what we see being the issues. So we are going to apply for a common source Title V permit. That means both MDU and Billings are part of this process. The key is Billings is ultimately, we are the ones that are creating, we own the landfill, we create the methane, but MDU will be developing a compliance plan and then be part of the compliance. So they'll share in the penalties, and we're not sure what form that'll take yet, but somehow they're going to have skin in the game, if you will. I mean, there's going to be requirements that they work with us to make sure we hit those numbers. The compliance flare is going to be the city's cost because it's our benefit. We're the ones that have to meet this. So the compliance flare will be the city cost. MDU is planning to operate that. It's so integral to their plant that it really wouldn't make sense for the city to operate the flare and them to operate the plant. So we propose that they operate it, and then we would reimburse them for any cost that is just completely compliance. So if they're not using the flare for their operations, if we just have to flare something for compliance, we'll pay them for that operational cost. And the flare is used continually between the compliance areas that we have that cannot be production wells, and then sometimes for the production or for the process itself, the flare will pretty much operate all the time. So the gas facility, as I said, MDU will be working on upgrading that plant. Larry's going to talk a little bit more about what that entails, but they would upgrade it, pay for all the cost of that, and operate it. Complete operational responsibility on their part as well. The city would have no part of that. The active gas collection, the production wells will be owned and installed by MDU, and the mitigation wells or the compliance wells that I referred to will be installed and owned by the city of Billings. So if something happens to those wells, we'll fix it. If something happens to the production wells, then MDU is responsible. The last is mostly things like the operational requirements. Again, I've kind of lined that out already, but it'll have a little more flesh on it as far as who's going to do what. Reporting requirements, this kind of lines out MDU is responsible to give us certain information at certain time, and then we have to get it into DEQ. So there's just responsibilities on both our parts. The Title V permit, as I said, we're going to apply for a common source permit there. And the revenue sharing is the conversation I anticipate we'll probably have a little more tonight. In the previous agreement, it was the city 15% and MDU 85%. We are looking at a similar amount on this one, and it's based loosely on mineral rights in the oil and gas industry. And so I'm going to let Larry kind of talk about how that calculates out. But I'm going to also go into some of the revenue we've seen and what we anticipate. And that's what I'm going to go into next. So you can see here over the last 10 years, we didn't really think it would be that productive. If you can see the first few years, we thought, well, this is nice. But then you start looking at 2017, $700,000. Those are really big numbers and very beneficial to the city. So this is with that 15-85 split. What you're seeing on some of those 2019, 2020, those declines, we had some wells that stopped producing, were damaged by equipment, some low quality methane in some areas. And so what you're seeing there is kind of that reduction due to those issues. Throughout this process, when we start putting in new wells and upgrading the plant, those numbers are going to go back up. So you can see here 2021 is back up in that $400,000 range. So when we look at the revenue in the future, it really is based on the RIN prices and the production. So we are looking at the RIN prices staying relatively strong in the short term, and our production is going to go up. I mean, you can see that on the map. We have to pull harder on these, and we're going to have to generate or pull more methane and generate more gas. So the numbers are going to go up. I didn't use a very good color there. Gas commodity prices are forecasted to increase in the short term, but then kind of return, so shouldn't plan on too much of an increase there. And you can see the production for 22, moderately higher than this year, but that is before we implement any of the upgrades. So that's kind of still with the existing system we have in place. Future revenues, like I said, we should have significantly more gas, so I see that number going up. Because there is going to be a pretty good outlay of capital cost and operational costs, which we don't see now, my recommendation is that some of that revenue goes to Public Works to cover that cost. Of course, if that doesn't happen, it's basically just a rate. I mean, it goes to our ratepayers to increase those rates to cover the operations costs. So I would recommend that some of that future revenue go into cover the capital and the increased operations, and then if there's money left, it could go to the general fund as it has been. If you want to give it all to Public Works, that's fine. I'm open to anything. Chris is going to kill me. No, I do think, I'll go back to this for a minute, with the increased numbers that we anticipate getting, we shouldn't see a decline in the general fund. I think we're going to be able to cover those operational costs, cover that capital outlay, and still see something pretty similar to what you're seeing here. So it's not going to be a big deduct, I don't think. So before we do questions, kind of like last time, I wanted to see if Larry could come up and fill in some of the blanks that I left, and then we can go to questions.
Great, Larry.
Previous slide?
That one?
On the River Summit, I think that'll help me tell the story. Good evening, Mayor, council members. Appreciate you having me here this evening. As Ms. Melling talked about, we're looking at adjusting our agreement, doing an amendment to our agreement due to, now moving into this compliance phase with those wells. As she talked about, we started this agreement in 2010 or a little over 10 years ago when we completed the plant. Initially, as you kind of indicated here, if you go back to 2010 with the production, it starts to ramp up. But those first 5-6 years, we weren't participating in the renewable fuel standard, which is what you generate the RINs, and RINs are renewable identification numbers. And they're underneath the renewable fuel standard, just like ethanol creates RINs, biodiesel creates RINs, and the refiners are obligated to purchase these RINs to offset the amount of diesel that they're selling into the market, right? And that's all underneath the renewable fuel standard. So once, the gas that we capture, or the methane that we capture from the landfill and turn into pipeline quality gas is called, creates what they call renewable natural gas, and that qualifies underneath the RFS. So up until that time period, we were just basically getting the commodity price of natural gas for that pipeline quality gas. And I can tell you at that, during those years, the plant was probably operating at a loss most of those years. The cost of production of producing that gas was higher than the market price of natural gas at the time. When we first built the plant, gas was probably $9, $10. We had pretty high gas prices. All of a sudden, the shale gas revolution started. Gas has been down in that $2, $3, $4 category for several years now. So in 2015, we were able to move into an offtake agreement with a third party to really monetize the environmental attributes of that gas, the renewable natural gas, into the renewable fuels, or into the RINs market. And actually, to some degree, we were participating in the low carbon fuel standard, or LCFS market in California and Oregon, because actually through our EPA certified pathway for the gas, it's moved from the plant in Billings, by displacement, to an LNG or CNG plant in California, creates the CNG or LNG out of that gas, that it is distributed into motor vehicle fuel in the state of California. And by doing that, it also created LCFS credits. So we monetize those as well for a period of time. However, today we're not seeing any LCFS credits from the gas, because most of the gas that is participating in the LCFS credits in California and Oregon is the biodigester gas from like the animal waste. That has such a better carbon intensity index that it generates way more credits faster. So it's really kind of displaced all the landfill gas from participating in that market. So that's why we're not projecting any additional revenue from that going forward. So it's just the RINs. But right now, the RIN prices are very good, very strong, seeing very good revenue from the plant and from the gas. So I just kind of wanted to explain that graph a little bit in terms of, or chart a little bit, how you see the revenue just uptick and how that happened, over the life of the plant here. So next, I'd just like to talk a little bit, thank you guys for the partnership. I think it's been a very good partnership. I think it's been very beneficial for the city and for MDU. As we move into this new phase, we've kind of proposed and worked with Public Works Department on what we feel some of those changes would be, and proposing those in the agreement. As we indicated in the presentation, we're proposing to leave the revenue sharing at the 85-15%, and maybe just give you a little background on the 85-15. Typically, traditional oil and gas royalties are somewhere between 12.5% and 25% of net operating revenue. The 15% that we provide to the city of Billings from the plant, that royalty is gross revenue. All these numbers you see are gross revenue numbers. We know that to operate the plant, it costs us about $1 million in O&M a year. So if we equate that back for comparison to a traditional oil and gas royalty in net revenue, that net revenue percentage is actually about 31%. So which we feel is above what you would see in the traditional oil and gas, and we feel that's fair value. We've invested about a little over $11 million in all the wells that we've installed in the plant as well. We know that the city is moving into having to invest some capital dollars for mitigation. And we're going to be still investing dollars in new production wells as we go forward with this agreement as well. We'll go one more to the projection slide, the next slide. Just want to explain a little bit about how I came up with the projection for the revenue for 2022. I do feel that's conservative. It's probably, could be a little bit higher. That's basically from our projection for gas prices and RIN prices when we put our budgets together back in June. And the gas price we were using at the time was probably about $3. Currently, the market price for gas is about $6 on the market. RINs, we were priced out at our average of about $1.80 a RIN, and they're currently at $3.20 a RIN right now. So, and I think that's still going to stay strong into 2022. So I do feel this is a conservative projection for next year's revenue. and hopefully it'll be even more. So.
Great. Some questions for Larry. I guess I'll start. One obvious one is how much do you expect in the way of capital investment from this point forward in order to implement these additional wells?
I have not, as far as our production, the production wells that we'll still bear the cost of, we haven't got a full design from the consultant yet, but just based upon the wells that in those completed sections, my guess is probably going to be somewhere in that $500,000 to $750,000, depending on the number of wells. Really, that section where the production wells will be going in, we already have installed vertical well, I should say, excuse me. We've installed horizontal wells in that section that are no longer producing because they've sagged and are full of water. But now we'll be coming back and putting in vertical wells that will drill down 100, 200, 150 feet, I think is the depth, to pull that methane out of those sections.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. Your deadline, so this all has to be in place, we have to be compliant by that date, or we have to have a plan to be compliant by that date?
Well, we hope a plan. So we have submitted to DEQ a compliance plan. Technically, we had 30 months from the time that we exceeded our NMOC number, which was January of 20. So that gives us the June of 22 date. But we have submitted a compliance plan that shows we'll be in compliance by September of 22. So we're waiting for them to make sure that they are, they agree with that, but that's the plan as of now. We should be able to get it in place by September of 22.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Tricky?
Two separate questions. Two different questions. So obviously the regulatory landscape changed quite a bit over the last 10 years. Have we collectively figured this out, or are we expecting more changes going forward?
So the regulation that we're now meeting is actually from 1990 Clean Air Act Amendment. So it's been in place for a long time, and there's a lot of landfills that are already having to hit these regulatory limits and report like we have to now. So we just triggered it, but it's not a new regulatory requirement on us. As far as other ones that we foresee happening, we really don't see any other big ones that are out there looming, just waiting to trigger. This was really the big one.
Okay, and the second question has to do with the whole pie in the sky about recycling. If we were to move to separation of organic material and like the grass stuff and stuff like that, is there a way that we can place it in some way to maximize the output from those areas?
Yes. So right now, we do separate like our C&D, our construction materials. We don't get any methane off those. We do have some yard waste in certain areas. Of course, we're going to get more yard waste off of those organics. Mixed garbage is hard. You know, when it comes in on trucks, it's going to go in the landfill as it is, unless we get a MRF or something where we are separating those materials. So yes, we can do a better job if we are separating them of creating areas that have very low methane and then some that have very high methane.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rewalt?
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, what areas are actually active at the landfill right now? Is there some way we could describe that?
There is. So if you look at the large blob on the left third, everything from that point to the left is closed cells. Everything to the right is open and active cells. So the part where you see very little of the exceedance is the closed cells. We don't have no exceedances in those areas, partly we think because we have some well issues, but this spot down here that's generally blue-gray is the closed cells.
So, follow up, please, Mayor. So that area down there kind of along, it looks like the river, but it's really not, is it?
Right. That's the
Isn't that closed up there? Isn't that next to the trailer court? Or am I looking
just
at
right
this
under
wrong?
the circle? Is that where you're talking
Up
about?
toward the top, upper left of the big blue blob.
I can use my mouse there. My IT guy's coming to help. Okay, so this area is closed, yes.
Yep,
So you're
okay.
talking basically right here, where this is kind of the separation of our cells. So this all down here is closed. This is all active. And this is why we need to get in and figure out why we're seeing some of these higher numbers in our closed cells.
Okay, and then just one more question right away. So is this going to be an average methane exposure? Like, if we get it all down to yellow, are we okay? Or if we got most of the yellow and just like one spot of red, does that make us okay? Or does we got to get rid of all the yellow and red?
Right. So we haven't received our permit yet, our Title V permit. So there's going to be permit conditions that come in that are going to define whether it's an average or whether it's a one exceedance or what those requirements are going to be. But the 500, that red number that you're seeing there, the 500 is technically what level we need to stay under. Whether it's an average or whether it's a one-time exceedance, we're just not sure yet.
All right, and then I just want to compliment you, Debbie, for sending this with, I mean, it's kind of nice to be able to have that to look at before we come here tonight.
There's a
Thank
lot
you
in
very much.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Debbie, what do all these flare pipes look like? It's going to be like my birthday cake with like 60,000 fires up on the landfill?
No, so the wells themselves will look like this. This is a vertical well that's existing right now. They will all be piped in to a compliance flare that'll be by the plant, so just the one flare. So we won't flare every well. We're just going to flare the one location.
Okay, Councilmember Denise?
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to ask that along the lines because, you know, every once in a while when the refineries flare out, I mean, it lights up the entire valley. How is this going to impact the residents around this area? I mean, if it's 24/7, how high is it going to be? Do you have any of that information, or have you notified the residents that we're putting a flare out there?
I think you're exceeding Larry and I's operational knowledge on this.
I don't know, you had the picture of the plant on the first slide, does this show our flare? Oh, yeah, you can't see our flare. We currently have a flare at the landfill plant facility. That it runs continuous, it's very small, it's not real high. You know, but if we have to divert all the gas to flare, you know, under emergency shutdown or something like that, you'll see a flame, but I don't know exactly how big, but there's already a flare at the existing facility.
Okay, thank you.
And, yeah, I guess kind of the obvious question is there's a lot of flammable stuff flying around out there. I was out there a couple days ago, and the plastic bags, they don't burn too well, but some of the paper and organic materials, is that a risk when you have flammable materials flying around all these pipes and on fire?
I was just going to say, as we design all of this, the flare and everything, we'll look at how to keep it safe.
So
we
some
haven't
sort of a
designed the
net
flare
around
yet.
it or cage perhaps to keep a distance?
Yeah, yep, there'll be a way to make sure that it's not going to catch us on fire. Yep.
All right, anything else for staff? Councilmember Ronning? And, I'm sorry, Councilmember Denise, you were still on it. Councilmember Denise and then Councilmember
a question. This may be for Gina, and maybe Debbie, you can answer this. I'll ask you first, I guess. If not, Gina can. I understand the contract is up, correct? So we're renewing the contract. So does this have to go out for RFP, or has this gone out for RFP to have a, to actually do this process?
So I will be interested to see what Gina says, but because they are currently, we hired them to be our methane producer on site 10 years ago. And I actually looked for how that selection was done. I wasn't a part of it, and I couldn't find out how that was done. So I'm still kind of trying to figure that out. I think there was some process. I just don't know what it is off the top of my head. But 10 years ago, they were hired to be our methane producer on site. There is something in the current agreement that says that if we don't use them, they can sell us all this equipment, and we can do it ourselves or go to somebody else. But I don't know if Gina has any other insight without knowing.
I don't really, honestly. I would guess that there's some sort of exception built into the statutes for this particular highly specialized kind of thing, but I'm not prepared to.
Okay, well, and again, I'm not saying suggesting anyone else would do it or even would step up to do it, just to make sure that we follow the process. And maybe if you do an RFP, no, MDU is going to be the only one who applies. And so anyway, that's something. And Mayor, if you don't mind, one more question.
Sure. And then Councilmember Ronnie.
And then Ronnie, thank you. If I understand right, if you can put the dollar map up correctly, the dollar one again. So out of the 10 years or so, we've gotten 3.5 million. That's represents 15% of the gross.
Yes.
So the plant's produced, and maybe I did my math wrong, about 527 million. Does that sound about right? No, I did my math wrong. I see someone shaking their head in the background.
Do my math again.
It should be about 6 times more than we got.
Okay.
So it'll be roughly another 20,000 that MDU has received, ballpark, back of the napkin stuff.
Another,
Okay.
yeah, 6 times 3 million.
And we didn't have any cost involved in this. This was just right to us. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ronnie.
Thank you. Oh, we have plenty of costs. It's called everyone who bought everything that sent it to the landfill. And Debbie, thank you so much. I got to spend the morning with solid waste, morning well into the afternoon with the solid waste department and ride along, and got to go out to the landfill. And it's shocking to see just one section alone, just a small section that's already 20 feet high, was only 1 week's worth of waste from our community. 1 week. That is shocking. But one of the things I guess I wanted to just clarify and give you my support for is that 85-15%. I don't know if you were looking for direction from council on that, but I support that. Had the opportunity to talk with Kyle and learn from him about his experience in Dallas, his experience in Fort Worth, and just quite frankly, we're getting a good deal from MDU. We're getting a good deal. So you have my support with that, and I wasn't sure if you were wanting that or not, but yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Why don't we move to public comment? Council, we have gone past 7:30. I apologize, but since we were at the end of the agenda and nobody was throwing their hands up, I'm assuming that was okay with you. Oh, Larry, one other item?
Mayor, if I could just state, we love to give tours of the facility. If you guys would like to set something up to come out and see the, tour of the facility, we've got our local operations here. We can definitely facilitate that anytime.
Okay, great. Councilmember Vivo?
I just, thank you, Mayor. Debbie, don't our landfill, our garbage trucks, don't they run on methane now? And do we fill up at your facility up at the landfill?
We do not. So we have 14 trucks on compressed natural gas. And so we do buy that from the system, but it's not a direct, like we don't feed straight into our trucks. It goes into the system and then we pull it out at the BOC.
Okay, thank you.
As compressed natural gas, yep.
Okay, thank you. So if you'd like to comment on this item, please come forward. Just ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. Is there anybody who would like to comment on item number 6? Nobody's coming forward. We'll close our public comment period. Council, how would you like to proceed? Would you like to take a short break or just wrap up here? Council discussion, I do know that we'd like to have at least a brief discussion about the process for the city administrator's review. And then we have public comment on non-agenda items. Is this, just a quick show of hands, who out there would like to comment on a non-agenda item? We've got at least 2. Does that help you, Council? Move ahead, finish her up, or does everybody need?
Finish this one up and then take a break.
Finish.
Okay.
Methane one up.
Well, I think we are done with that one.
I got a question, yeah.
Oh, okay, just general discussion. So sure, we're still then, item 6, Councilor Rewalt.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie, is there such a thing as a barrier that can be applied to keep that gas from coming up in all different places and make it more into a local area?
So we actually did line a portion under a project that we were doing some storm drainage. And what it did was it came out the sides and the concentration was so much higher that really it just moves it around. If we can collect it underground and pull it out into wells and then into a pipe, it's going to be the best way to do it. We can concentrate, of course, with the way we use our landfill and possibly how we put our wells in. But
okay, thank you.
Okay, any other discussion on this item before we open up for council discussion? Councilmember Bernice?
Thank you, Mayor. I think that Debbie, you may have been looking for, like Penny Ronnie said, agreement on whether that percentage was correct or not. And I can tell you, I'm not knowledgeable enough, and that was my question to you in my email was, what have you studied? What is your professional opinion of what that number is? Or should we hire a consultant to actually get that number?
Sorry, and I meant to add that in, I apologize. So we've done quite a bit of research. Our superintendent came from Arkansas where they had a 90-10, very similar situation in a 90-10 split. We have seen, it's kind of across the board. We've seen situations where the landfill owner is no part of the gas system at all. They lease the land and they say, you do it, make it work, and it's a land lease. They have no part of the gas, no revenue, no nothing. We've seen some where there's a lot more involvement on the part where the municipality actually operates some of the system or puts in more of the wells. So it was kind of hard to get an apples to apples comparison because we're doing part of it, but not all of it. So we have some questions out to communities all over the country. We've gotten one response. So we've called quite a few people though and talked directly. And I think from what I've seen, what our costs are going to be, what their costs are going to be, I would recommend the 85-15, which is why we brought it like this. We'll continue looking into that, but based on the numbers I've seen and some of the discussions I've read about the oil and gas industry and royalties and that kind of thing, I think the city's doing well in this.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Anything else? Don't see any, so we'll decree that item 6 is done. Bring us to council discussion. Are there items of council discussion? Let me just start off. I sent around an email, I just passed it around about Chris's evaluation. We will meet in executive session on November 22nd, I think is the date to go over that. We had some emails amongst ourselves about getting input from department heads. And in my email to the council, I said that I'd run that by Chris, and he was whatever the council wants to do. I asked Carla to give us find some samples of how that has been done. That does raise certain issues about, we haven't done that in the past, confidentiality of that. I would suggest that we proceed pretty cautiously on that, figure out what the details would be if we go down that path. We could try to get that done between now and November 22nd, or we could set up a committee to actually make that happen for next year, but develop a more detailed plan. I would say if we did have a committee like that, we should look at that evaluation form and anything else that group wanted to suggest in the way of the evaluation process. So that's kind of what's in that email that I sent around. Maybe there are other issues that other council members want to raise, but I know that was a topic that we wanted to talk about at least briefly tonight. Council, on that item or others, how do you want to proceed?
I think there's an email also that Penny sent, and I'd like her to address that because I agree with her, and I thought that we would like to move forward. So Penny, if you wouldn't mind.
Councilor Ronning.
Sure, thank you. So this has been something we've been talking about really in the last 3 years, almost. What have you been? We've had 2 evaluations with you so far. And in my conversations with Carla, the evaluation process with the different department heads is something that was consistent with Tina when Tina Volek was the city administrator. And part of this issue that we had with council when we first started to do Chris's evaluations is that there are questions on the evaluation process that we as council members fill out that actually have to do with his relationship with city staff. We have no ability to actually answer those questions. And the way that the evaluation process is right now that I find problematic is because we can't answer those questions, because as city council, we have one employee, and that's the city administrator. When we as a council cannot answer those questions on the forms, that actually works against the city administrator's overall score. that is provided, because we may fill out zeros or we may fill out NAs or something like that, and that actually lowers the score. And I personally don't find that fair to the city administrator evaluation process. So my encouragement, this will be the last evaluation that I'll participate in. So because we had talked about this in the executive session in regard to the city administrator's evaluation process, we talked about that the last couple of years, but no one on council has really taken the lead to change that process. And it is a council responsibility to change that process. It's not us giving a directive to the city administrator to change the process by which he's evaluated. This really is a council responsibility. So that's why I started the conversation that we move in this direction to either really understand that when we go into the evaluation process with Chris, that his scores are not going to be reflective of perhaps what they really should be. But also, if the new council wants to do something that those that are remaining and moving forward, start that process, take the responsibility and start that process and improve the process. That's my hope. Also met with Chris about this as well, and had a wonderful conversation with him. Want everyone to know he's absolutely open to being evaluated by his department directors, very open to that, feels that that's beneficial to the process, that's beneficial to the city. Truly appreciate the conversation that we had, Chris, thank you. And we've talked about this in previous evaluations, that departments and businesses, they do these 180, 360 type evaluations. So we've been talking about this for almost 3 years, so hopefully the future council, or whatever the decision is going to be for this one, we move forward and the future council moves forward in putting together a little bit better process.
Good, thank you. Councilmember Brown?
Yeah, I would not recommend that we try to get input from the department heads at this late date. You know, I've been in management for a lot of years, and it's generally a survey of, you know, those that I work with, a couple a year even, to see if I'm effective or if I'm not effective. It's not, you know, literally asking, you know, my staff to evaluate me. I think the surveys are very effective, and if you do it more than once a year, you get a pretty good trend. They're cheap. You know, they're completely anonymous. So I think if it's going to be changed, you know, that might be a good way to do that. But I would comment that, you know, those questions on the eval, I don't think are necessarily dig into the weeds and, you know, does he have a great relationship with that guy versus that guy? It's, you know, our staff leaving, our staff, are we not able to hire? Are we, you know, those kinds of things show that, you know, we have a bad manager. You know, if those aren't issues, then, you know, then that person is successful. I think we might be trying to dig a little too deep, but some of those questions do get pretty pointed. So I would certainly support somebody redoing that. I think it's terrible, and I always have thought it was terrible. But I think surveys, things like that, could be great tools to really figure out, you know, how anybody's doing in the job, but not just once a year.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other comments? And before we have other items of council discussion, and I will say Councilman Boyette did indicate some willingness to head up a committee like that, and since he's not here tonight to defend himself, I think that becomes kind of a no-brainer. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. Yeah, I really think an evaluation is an opportunity for anyone, and we all get evaluated on some level at some point, is an opportunity for us to get feedback about how we do things and areas that we can improve in and that kind of thing. So if the surveys are anonymous, kind of wide-ranging. That sounds like a good opportunity for a leader and an administrator to be able to get some feedback that can help build that teamwork, and also to help have the administrator be able to get that feedback for improvements or whatever.
Thank you. Any other comments on that topic? Councilmember Neese?
The Penny's said most of it. I agree, Penny. I think that we need to move forward on it. Sean, to you, I think trying to throw it together now, we're going to get the same thing we had before. I don't even know where that evaluation form came from. I would like to see us have a committee. I would like to see us maybe hire a consultant that understands employment and what we're looking for and how to evaluate your CEO of the company, of the city, and then look at that. So that's, I guess, if there's a motion to be made or a direction to be made, I don't know how we want to proceed with this, Mayor, but I think there's based upon the conversations we've had, I think there's a motion, there's movement among the council that they want to do this.
Good, and I do think it would be helpful to get a motion, because what we're going to need is some assistance from our HR director. She, although it's not her job to implement all of this, she can certainly be a big help, but we can't give her direction, so we really have to direct the city administrator to direct his employee, if that's okay with Chris, just for assistance in this process. So
do we want to make this a motion to direct the city administrator to create a council committee or a staff committee? How do you council members think that would work best, having, just shy of a majority of council members?
Yeah, I think a committee would be good, and non-quorum, and whatever is the simplest process to make that happen. Maybe Chris's office could act as a gathering point for any volunteers who want to participate, with, again, Councilmember Boyette as the head. We'll have a little surprise for him when he gets back.
I guess.
I was going to say, how about the mayor council office?
What's that? I'm sorry?
How about the mayor council office?
To meet as a meeting place? Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I guess I'll make that motion to direct our city administrator to bring to us a council committee for city administrator review process.
Very good, with just to receive volunteers. Is that clear enough? Sure. You want to, before we get let's get a second. Is there a second for that? Second by Councilmember Brown. Chris, is that clear enough to help you?
Can you just be clear about whether this is for this year or both this year and next year?
What I was hearing is to get moving on it, but it is not to try to get done by November 22nd.
Yeah, get it, so for next year.
And thank you, Councilman Maroney. For me, it's not an issue at all, those conversations. I've just expressed an importance to take it seriously if you want to get honest feedback. I mean, we could throw something out there and by tomorrow afternoon, and you can get responses from any of the 950 employees who work for the city. What you're going to do with that information and how you're going to use it's pretty important as to how honest people are with the feedback. And that's what I've always asked, that we do this thoughtfully, because it is helpful to me, it's helpful to us and to you if it's thoughtful. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'll work with Councilmember Boyette to get a group going. And as I understand our rules of procedure, it really is frankly important that it's kind of odd, but that it really is a city administrator created group, because you have some specific rules about how to, and 30-day timelines and all kinds of things relative to you formally creating some kind of a subcommittee. So I'll be happy to work with Councilmember Boyette so that he can get off and running in a way to meet the current and the future city council's kind of desire for an improved system going forward. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other items of council discussion for us this evening?
Do we have to vote on that?
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Ready to get out of here. Okay, the motion cleared, everybody? If so, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes. Thank you. Any other items of council discussion? Councilor Rebo?
Pam Purington, or Councilmember Purington, brought up issue about concentrations on the cannabis item, and I think it's going to be talked about as an amendment next week. So it would probably be good to do a little bit of homework like tonight and discuss a little bit of stuff. And we have two people in the audience out there that would like to speak to it, and I think we should listen to them and see what they got to say, and if they got questions, throw them at them.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody's entitled to offer comment in our next section on anything that wasn't on the agenda. That wasn't on the agenda. So I see a few people who may want to comment, and they're more than welcome to do so. And if you have questions for that, I imagine our city attorney would caution us against getting into something too deep that wasn't on the agenda and initiating that. And she's nodding her head over there. But the public is entitled to comment on anything they want that's not on our agenda. Councilmember Denise.
Thank you, Mayor. Just along those same topics of discussion amongst the council members, Frank mentioned that Pam wanted to talk about concentrations. I'm interested in learning more about the concentrations, and I'm not sure we can get anything done before the end of the year, but definitely maybe sometime in the future. And I'd like to hear from other council members if they agree or think that that's a path we want to go down. Maybe not, if we can't do it this year. Of course, some of you will not be here, but I would like to have your opinion. If you were here, would you consider looking at, concentration levels or potency levels of products?
Councilmember Rewalt.
I do.
My view is it's certainly worth discussion, and I would like to have a better understanding of our need to proceed very quickly this year versus putting it off and being more careful, and that becomes a bit of a legal issue for our city attorney. Councilmember Brown?
Yeah, I would absolutely support it if we could come up with how we're going to accomplish it and how we're going to charge the companies or whatever for that, because that's going to be somewhat laborious, I would think. But I think it's important. I really do.
Councilmember Ronning, again, we're just trying to give a quick general census here.
Yeah, I support that also.
Anybody else like to comment before we open it up for public comment on non-agenda items?
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is an opportunity if anybody would like to come forward and comment on anything that wasn't on our agenda this evening. Ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and your address, please.
Kristen Lundgren, 1719 Front Street. So I'm just here about, sent an email as a follow-up to the discussion last Monday from Substance Abuse Connect with a recommendation around potency and serving size. And I just wanted to say, excuse me, I'm available to talk to any of you all this week, anytime through that. I think it's a really reasonable, pragmatic solution for right now that would really, really help with what some of the most dangerous things that we would anticipate from the high levels of potency. And hopefully you got it. It exempts anything medical. So this is, we're not talking, all our recommendations have nothing to do with the medical side. And we simplified it a lot. So just to say, simplified it a lot. The state has named a whole bunch of products like edibles, tinctures, and we think that's unwise. We simplified it down so that it will be manageable and not have to be changed all the time. So, and then the second thing that we noticed after last week was that the testing labs are lumped in with all the other new marijuana businesses, and we think it would be wise to not do that and to allow our testing labs to get up and running as quickly as possible, so to take them out. And I just want to let you know that was a second thing that we think would be important. The testing labs are going to be important, so that's all.
Okay, if there are any questions for Kristen, feel free, but not seeing any. Thank you. Next.
My name is Carl Rood, 1939 Iris Lane. Kristen and I had an opportunity to have lunch with one of the councilmen. I have probably filled most of your guys' inboxes, email boxes, voicemail boxes, and I've been returned by many of you. I want to thank you all. One of the things I love about being born and raised in this city is the fact that you can reach out, be a part of local government, have people respond, and have your points considered. I even cornered one of the council people on City Street, and I didn't get pepper sprayed, so I do appreciate that. I'm very interested in the testing laboratories. I'm involved in business, and healthcare business in particular, and run labs in that discipline. This is something that we've been considering at a corporate level for a very, very long time. As it's come into the city of Billings, the opportunity was out in front of us, and the moratorium that went into effect chilled our abilities to actually start up a lab. My estimates are it's going to take me about 120 days to have that actually come to effect. And so from the time that we get started on January 1st, according to the way the moratorium sets right now, we'll be almost a half a year behind the rest of the industry as it gets off to a running start. I have opportunities that I've looked at and employees that I'm looking at hiring, people that already live and work in the city of Billings, and we're just kind of waiting to see when, where, and how we will put this into place. I must say I was very honored to be invited by Kristen into some of these conversations. She and I have worked on things in the past when I was an employee of the city of Billings for other matters. It was really great to be at the table with her, to have my opinions considered, to have my inputs vetted by all sides of the aisle, and I really just appreciated the opportunity to be involved in the process. So it would be my contention, having reviewed everything that Kristen put together, that you consider what it is that she's put out as being very, very middle of the road, very non-objectionable to a lot of the people that I've talked with in the industry, as well as people that are opposed to the industry. It really does sit as a truly common ground. And then personally, I put a lot of language forward to her to talk about how it would be that we could move to put laboratories into effect so that we could be testing the products that are being put out to the citizens of the city of Billings. And I think if we're going to be talking about safety, and we're going to be talking about quality control, and we're going to be talking about the dangers of these products that might be present, it's going to be important that the city leads with one firm foot forward to say we should at least know how we're scoring that and who's scoring that. And so I'd like an opportunity to be that person. If you guys do have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much. Looks like we do have a question. Councilor Revolt.
Thank you, Mayor. Carl, the one thing that's hard to probably navigate through is milligrams and grams. So a milligram is 1,000th of a gram, isn't that true? Okay, so if we go with in Kristen's email, she had 5 milligrams per serving. That 5 milligrams is pretty infinitesimally small.
Yes.
So just to put numbers to the whole thing, I changed it from 5 milligrams to 5 grams. And so 5 grams is actually 5,000 milligrams. And so if you got 35% of 5 grams, you've got 1.75 grams. And so that would be 1,750 milligrams per serving. Isn't that a lot of THC per serving?
Yeah, if there was a typographical error in that, the recommendation is that individual servings be at 5 milligrams, not at 5 grams.
Yeah, I know, that's what I mean, but that 5 milligrams is really, really tiny, small. I think, didn't she say, Roy, that gummy is like 0.43 grams or something like that?
Package of total weight to the consumable item. What we're talking about in that is the measurable amount of THC that would then be present inside of the gummy bear. And then also making sure that the total concentration of any given volume of product not be over 35% by weight of the total product. So the smaller a product is, the lesser it might be allowed to have by that concentration percentage amount. And that's really to reduce accidental ingestion of small amounts at high potency levels. And so then they're talking about this 5 milligram dose is kind of at an industry point, kind of that base level intoxication point that people are looking for. And so if you draw it into the alcohol world, we're talking about one consumable drink of alcohol, whether that's a single beer or a glass of wine. That way, when people are purchasing those items, they're packaged in a way that people can identify that that's the consumable amount for the intended intoxication that they're trying to reach.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ronning?
Thank you. My question, thank you so much. My question's actually for Chris or Gina. So in regard to, and I have to say, I've never quite understood why we put testing labs, and maybe there was an answer that was given and it, went over my head. A lot of information being given to us. Why did we lump testing labs in with all of the other facilities? Because it seems to me like testing labs could really go anywhere where there are commercial properties. Was there a reason why the recommendation was testing labs be in the same zones as the other businesses?
And Gina, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think the original approach with the moratorium was to provide ourselves with a maximum kind of timeout while you set a set of regulations in place. So it wasn't, we didn't go, of each of the 7 and go, oh, we should set this aside. It was, let's thoroughly look at the full gamut and determine where you want the policy to go going forward. On the surface, as a staff, we actually think the testing labs are an economic development opportunity for our community, for sure. Now that we've been able to do some research and analysis, I think part of what I know I'm going to need Gina's help is our challenge today as we sit here literally November 1. These were you're 7 days away from second reading, 30-day effective date. I'm not sure that we can do anything that will remove or change it faster than the timeline we're on to get a full set of regulations adopted, including opening up, where testing labs are allowed to be. I could be off on that, but that's what I think is what we're facing right now.
Please.
So this would be for Gina. Similar to the question I asked at the last business meeting, not to take away from anything that Chris just said, but if council did say, okay, we would like to, this is just a big if, big I, big if. If council says we would like to remove testing labs from the other combined businesses and allow them to not be just in the zoning that we've put forward for the dispensaries and the other businesses, would that be, I'm assuming that's considered a substantial change, and just like what I asked about potency, would that kick it to a 3rd reading? And second question, can you just verify again that if we did go to a 3rd reading, we would still have time to actually put this ordinance in place as if we just had a 2nd reading?
Sure. Yes, Councilmember Ronning, that taking the testing labs out of, making a change within the zoning ordinance, that would be a substantive change, would kick that out to a 3rd reading. But that would put us at November 22nd. So 30 days after that, December 22nd. So we would still be okay. There's time to do that. We would just need to know if council wants to make any changes with regard to the business license regulation ordinance as well with regard to testing labs, or if that's all going to stay the same, because there may be amendments involved there. Another thing to consider is, like Chris just mentioned, we would have to amend the interim zoning ordinance as well if council's trying to expedite getting those businesses up and running and in place. The business license regulation moratorium and the interim zoning ordinance would both have to be amended, but like Chris said, that would take us out to almost to the point where those ordinances are going to expire anyways. Just one other thing to think about is I understand the public comment about the testing labs, but really the products have to be tested before they go out for sale. So it affects the supply of the product that the testing labs aren't up and running, but it doesn't affect the safety of the product because they have to be tested first. So it really affects the supply of the retail rather than in anything else.
Okay, Councilmember Brown.
Just caution slippery slope here when we start saying, okay, we're going to modify this, but I mean delivery, the delivery or transportation could be another one that's not threatening, and another, I mean, we're getting down to the line here. So I just cautious.
Yeah, and also procedurally, I do have some concern. Remember, this is not on our agenda for this evening. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And this is going to be just a an opinion-based question, and so, and very broad. So if one of the goals that we are trying to attain is to ensure public safety of what they're ingesting, do you know from your experience or other maybe research that you have, how does a regulation on the potency of a product impact the overall use of illegal marijuana? Because we're talking about business, legal business and regulated business. Do you know anything about if you put a potency, does it drive consumers to illegal business and illegal product, or is that something that you know anything about? Thank you.
My answer, Councilwoman Joy, would mostly come out of the study of economics in my undergrad in criminal justice. I used to work law enforcement for the city of Billings, and now I've got an MBA in healthcare, and it's mostly just about supply and demand economics. For those things which there is demand, there has been supply and continues to be. To the degree which you put regulations in place, if somebody's motivated to make those purchases, especially when the supply chain's already established, one of the things that we found, especially through some of the war on drugs stuff and the crack pandemic in California, especially in the late 80s and early 90s, was that those efforts to regulate did not dry up the demand, which is what forced the supply. So, presumably to the motivated consumer, where illegality is not a concern for theirs, there may still be opportunities for them to participate in black market or dark gray market purchases. There's also the concern that we'll have a regulated island inside of an unregulated state. And so there's nothing about the sale of what you're promoting that would prohibit the possession of what would be available in areas outside of the city.
Okay, thank you. A few last comments. Let's try to wrap up. Councilmember Neese?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And sorry I was not here during the discussion last week, but to Councilmember Brown's point, I am a little concerned about changing it, but one of the things I would have done, unfortunately I wasn't here, was to add the E-Bird. So Gina, are you saying if we add the E-Bird into the zoning area, that would cause a third reading? It's too substantive by adding a zone area?
It's not anything to do with the E-Bird.
That, any substantive change, that would be a substantive change, yes, and it would cause third reading. As far as the practical making such a change to zoning ordinance, I'm going to have to defer that to Wyeth, but that would definitely.
Okay, and if it was the third reading, I think you said we would still have time by the end of the year, so, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Don't see anything. Thank you, Mr. Root, appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments on non-agenda items? Mr. Nelson. Oh, I'm sorry. Kristen Colsey wanted to comment on this last topic.
Sorry.
Don't go away, Kevin.
And I apologize, this would have been probably more helpful before we got to the public comment, but I wanted to be clear with you and the public as to what we did after last Monday's conversation. So we did have a conversation with Substance Abuse Connect Tuesday. We asked them to make a set of recommendations to our staff, and our staff is working with those recommendations as to how it can or can't, how can it easily be implemented into or not so easily be implemented into the law and your first reading ordinance. So we've not ignored any of that. And so that is what our staff is doing with that information. So absolutely welcome you to call, and very grateful for Kristen and what she was able to do to get their team together to help us. Just recognize your legal staff is taking that information, the simplicity of that, and trying to make that, see how it does or doesn't work inside the regulatory environment in the state of Montana. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that update. Just a reminder to the public, we are not making any decisions on this topic this evening. Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think we were accusing staff for not doing anything. This is a very complicated issue, and we got to try and cover all the bases before we pass it in third reading or second reading or whatever, because we want to get things done right and have it so we don't have a big legal problem later on, and we might still have one, but we weren't accusing staff of not doing anything.
No.
That isn't what we're going on.
And I sorry for miscommunicating. That's not what I was thinking either. I wanted you to know what had happened since last Monday night's THC conversation. So thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
Kevin Nelson, 4235 Bruce Avenue. Has to do with the Sabura board. But I'd start off with a word. One word. Groupthink. Groupthink.
Is that one word or two?
That's one word according to Wikipedia.
Okay, all right, just checking.
Got it right here.
With a hyphen, okay, with a hyphen, okay.
Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people in which the desire for harmony and conformity in the group results in irrational, dysfunctional decision-making outcomes. There's even a thing here on psychological today stuff, and it sort of says the same thing that, it just, when you have a group that is just in harmony, there's no critical thought, there's no critical decision-making. And so there were some comments earlier that sort of, I think, reinforces, at least to me, it's my comments, is when you asked Mr. Tevlin about where's this rec center at, and he said, well, we've been meeting once a week since January. What was his answer? Didn't have much. I asked Mr. Zier, the chairman, are these meetings public? And he said, no, they're private meetings, and the public is on a need-to-know basis. So we have decisions getting made in a vacuum, no critical thought. While making the sausage is not pleasant, but generally it produces a little better product if there's a few more people at the table. As you will recall, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Joy, I think Mr. Ewald, Mr. Yakovich, that steering committee that we had at the rec center was pretty productive in a very short order because we got to work and things got done. There were some comments made here tonight about your city administrator and how much better effective he's going to be if he's got a little bit of, oversight. Well, how much better could that committee have down there been if they would have had public oversight, and how much farther down the road would we be if they were having to qualify their arguments, protect their opinions, but they're not. They're just in a vacuum thinking that, oh, I'm the smartest people in town, so I must have all the answers, and so they just expect everyone else just to accept them. Well, that's not going to work out well for them, because people are not going to just take for granted or, oh yeah, no, there are going to be questions, and so it's just going to bog it down. I mean, you talk about extending the bond. Heck, we may need a bond for a long time based on this project cost that's going to go skyrocketed that we probably should have been way farther on down the road with this project, but because this thing is bogged down with that group down there, we're way behind. But I would ask that, I've asked before, is this body here needs to demand that body open up its meetings to the public in those weekly meetings so we can see who's there, what they're talking about, what they're discussing, so we can understand the process just like everyone else. And those meetings absolutely must be open to the public in order to get the city's and the people's confidence behind them so we can see what's going on. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment on anything not on our agenda this evening? Any other public comment on non-agenda items? Don't see any, so our public comment period is closed there. And before we adjourn, Councilmember Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I ask the city administrator or the city attorney regarding the meetings like this where you have, a public organization, the TIF district, when they have subcommittee meetings like this, are those open to the public? Is that something that the public has a right to know about these meetings and attend these meetings?
So, Mayor and Council, generally speaking, as long as there's not a quorum of that group, they can have private meetings. If they have a quorum or more, then there's a requirement for notice. You also have a dynamic in Billings, which is not your 3 Your TIF boards are not appointed by the city council, so recognize they serve more than one purpose. So you also have to ask, what are they meeting for? Are they meeting for their private group interest, or are they meeting as an advisory group to the city relative to tax increment financing dollars? So in general terms, if it is not a quorum of the group, they can have a meeting, and that does not have to be a publicly noticed meeting, but no decisions can be made there. The constitutional right for a citizen is that they be notified and they are allowed to participate in decisions that are being made. And so you may have a lot of conversations going on about recommendations or what people might want to do, but at the end of the day, if they're not making a decision, then
great. So thank you. Okay. Thank you. That may address some of the legal issues, but of course, we want public buy-in on this whole process, and that's a whole other question. So, okay, council, thank you very much for your time. We are adjourned.